March 2nd, 2023 business meeting of the Boulder City Council. I'm going to go ahead and...
Looks like Council Chambers is muted, so we can't hear on Zoom. Oh, there we go. Thank you so much.
Can everybody hear me now? Okay, yep. Great. I will repeat. Yes. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March 2nd, 2023 regular meeting of the Boulder City Council. I'm going to go ahead and call us to order and ask Emily, who is our acting city clerk for the evening, to do the roll call.
Thank you so much, Mayor, and good evening, everyone. We'll start tonight's roll call with Council Member Benjamin.
Present.
Mayor Brockett.
Present.
Councilmember Folkerts.
Present.
Friend.
Here.
Joseph.
Here.
Councilmember Spear.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Wallach. Weiner.
Here.
And Yates.
Right here.
Mayor, we have our quorum.
Thanks so much, Emily. And so now I would request a motion to amend the agenda to add an item 8B, a discussion on boards and commissions updates to council.
So moved. Second.
Motion is second. All in favor, show of hands. That passes unanimously. And I'm just going to take a moment before we turn to our next thing to acknowledge that it's been a frightening couple of weeks in our community. We had a shooting incident at the Millennium Hotel. We had a very scary false report of a shooting incident at Boulder High, followed by a second false report just yesterday, as well as an injury shooting in downtown a couple nights ago. So just wanted to acknowledge that in this time where gun violence is a scourge across our society, this has been a frightening time for our community, but just want to thank all the first responders and the school district and everyone else who has helped to make sure that everyone has been as safe as possible through these incidents. So thanks for listening to that. Now I will turn to Councilmember Folkerts for a National Women's History Month declaration.
Thank you, Mayor. March 2023 is Women's History Month. Each year, Women's History Month offers an important opportunity for us to shine a light on the extraordinary legacy of trailblazing women and girls who have built, shaped, and improved upon our community. Women have been leaders not only in securing their own rights of suffrage and equal opportunity, but also leaders in the abolitionist movement, the emancipation movement, the industrial labor movement, the civil rights movement, the movement for racial equity, and countless other peace movements that have led to a more fair and just society for all. Yet, despite women's immeasurable contributions to the fight to advance civil rights and other civil liberties, early feminist movements were not inclusive of all women. These initial calls for social justice focused on the experience of women who were cisgender, heterosexual, and white. Today, we acknowledge the equality and significance of all women, including transgender women, queer women, women with disabilities, women of color, and unhoused women, in our pursuit of social justice for all. Women of every race, class, and ethnic background have made historic contributions to the growth and strength of Boulder in countless recorded and unrecorded ways. We, the City Council, and the City of Boulder, Colorado, declare March 2023 as Women's History Month and invite the community to join us in a celebration of all women and the progress we have made as a society, as well as reflect on the work still ahead to reach full gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Lauren. Okay, we're now going to move to open comment, and I will now turn to Brenda Rittenauer to read our public participation guidelines.
Thank you. And if Elisha, you could share those guidelines. I think I saw them shared in chamber. There we go. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we know that many of you who have joined us tonight have seen these slides many times. We do appreciate your patience while we go over them for folks who have not joined us as often. We do want you to be aware that the city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members for staff, and for council, as well as supporting democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. More information about this vision and the community engagement process that we conducted to lead to it, please go to our website, bouldercolorado.gov, and type productive atmospheres into the search bar there. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision, and these will be upheld during this meeting tonight. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to sign up to speak using the name that they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. And if you do need me to change your name, you are welcome to reach out to me in the Q&A box, and I can help with that. In-person participants are asked to refrain from expressing support or disagreement verbally or with applause, with the exception of declarations, as you just heard Councilmember Folkerts read. Traditionally, support is shown silently through American Sign Language applause, or sometimes we call them jazz hands or sparkle hands. You may feel free to practice now. And thank you very much. With that, we can move on to open comment.
Thank you, Brenda. That's the first time I've heard sparkle hands. I like that. Okay, so we have 7 in-person speakers and 3 virtual speakers. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to speak. Our first 3 in-person speakers are Jared Curran, Travis Cully, and Michelle Rodriguez. So Jared. Okay, doesn't look like we have Jared in the room, so Travis Cully.
Good evening, Council. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to go full speed. Ms. Weiner, I want to appreciate your full-throated statement to the benefits of sufficient signage on our mountain trails. I believe more weight should be placed on the signage around the Rocky Flats Perimeter Operating Unit, otherwise known as the Wildlife Refuge. Not because people may get lost or need emergency services, but because contaminated gravel from the Wildlife Refuge can be mishandled there on the refuge. It can be taken off the refuge. It can endow common properties of everyday things in civilization with radioactive characteristics, forcing us to reconsider the behaviors of the 4 elements in themselves and in combination. If signage around Rocky Flats is not given real attention and considered a serious issue, all of the work of fire crews and fire marshals, some $37 million recently allocated, will be undermined. Change out clean earth for fugitive plutonium. Change out water with diesel fuel or petrol readily available in civilization. Change out air into a blast of radiation, and fire can be made without a spark. This is called automatic combustion. I believe this is what took place between the 2 diesel tanks on the 12 Tribes property at 11 a.m. on December 30th, period. The 12 Tribes community did not burn down their own barn, nor did they elect to be EG&G's next industrial scapegoat. Detectives made an incomplete investigation of the community members themselves. I would like to give you a synopsis of what I believe actually took place in an email or to council or in private. I'm eager for feedback and direction from you.
Thank you, Travis. Next, we have Michelle Rodriguez, then Larry McKeough, and Jane Williams.
Hi, guys. I submitted something earlier. I'm not sure. I think it was forwarded on to you guys. It's not something that you can review all in this 2 minutes. I'm doing it 2 minutes at a time. But tonight, I didn't realize it was celebrating Women's History Night. So I wanted to recognize somebody that's made a big difference in my life. Judge Christy Martinez. We lost her in Boulder County last week, I think it was. And as a few of you know, I've got some controversial things that have gone on in the courts, but I want to acknowledge that she was one of the most righteous judges or people of the courts that I've ever run across. She was very fair and made a ruling of prosecutorial misconduct in one of my cases. And it meant everything to me because it showed just this tiny bit of acknowledgement for the injustices that I've been trying to prove for so long. I had no idea she was sick, and I was devastated to find out she had passed away. And I want to honor her part in my life, and I'd like. I gave Nuria a little bit of heads up about what I had submitted tonight. I don't want to take the light anymore off of it with me crying over Judge Martinez's loss, but I asked that that the city council and the powers that be just review what I've submitted. I'm trying to find peace of my mind and my heart to be able to move forward somehow. But thank you guys.
Thank you, Michelle. Now we have Larry Mikyoga, Jane Williams, and Jonathan Finch.
Good evening, members of council. My name is Larry McKeough. I've been a Boulder resident for 33 years, an avid user of City Parks and Rec services for 20, and I've been working with Parks and Rec staff for the last 15, primarily by running open water swims at the res for Boulder Aquatic Masters. I'm here to comment on overmanagement and underutilization at the Boulder Reservoir. This is the same topic that I commented on a year ago. Pre-pandemic, the reservoir opened at 5 a.m. to allow motivated users to make use of the valuable sunshine during the short summer season. Last week, City Parks and Rec staff presented the 2023 reservoir rates to adult user groups operating outside of normal operating hours. This included a 300% price increase. The short of what we were told was the city doesn't want to continue to subsidize user groups, and the city doesn't view the user groups as partners in providing a community benefit. Please note, user groups such as Boulder Aquatic Masters and the Rowers pay the city staff to be present for the full 5 a.m. hour, despite sometimes needing less. We also pay full rates for watercraft permits, on-site storage, facility access and rental fees, and we supply our own volunteer safety personnel along with the requisite training to meet or exceed any city requirements. In BAM's case, this is all for the luxury of just doing setup work for a swim that occurs during normal operating hours. As you can hear, we're not against paying for services used. The 300% figure mentioned earlier was based on a calculation that took the total operating budget divided by the total number of operating hours across the entire year to create a uniform blanket rate. No discount is offered given the skeleton crew needed at this time. The res acknowledges different usage in the off-season and adjusts the rates by up to 100%. When a user group is willing to self-support to the point of supplying equipment, personnel, training, insurance coverage to defray the cost at an underutilized hour of the day, why are we penalized for our efforts? Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Now we have Jane Williams, then Jonathan Finch, and Evan Ravitz. Do we have Jane in the room? Seeing none, we'll go to Jonathan Finch. Jonathan's not here either. Okay, it's a light night for attendance. Evan is in the room.
Good evening. Evan Ravitz, North Boulder. Congratulations to City Council on deciding at your retreat last week to stop repeating the same thing for the homeless over and over again, expecting a different result, as both Lauren and Rachel said, which was Einstein's definition of insanity. My late friend, Dr. Bob McFarland, the first medical director of the People's Clinic, now Clinica, and founder of the Parenting Place, told council in the 60s that young people with little or no money would always be attracted to Boulder and we should provide a campground. Instead, the city has increasingly criminalized camping anywhere near here. Over the half century, the city has made thousands of enemies. Many hundreds of lives have been shortened degraded, and ended. God knows how many fingers and toes have been amputated because of frostbite. At least 3 wildfires are likely to have been started by homeless people just in the last 6 years or so, presumably hiding campfires under trees. But we never learn the truth, as we still haven't, about the newborn baby and mother who died outdoors within sight of the hospital a couple of years ago. It looks like the city's manifold homeless enemies have figured out that smoking meth can close down libraries, bus stations, and now ATMs, costing us millions. The city has a whole lot of splaining to do. The best explanation I've heard for repeating this insanity for over half a century was in 2017, when the late Sam Sussman, then a board member of Downtown Boulder, told me, quote, "Downtown Boulder runs the city." Again, I suggest treating the homeless with the golden rule. Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. Now going to move to our online speakers, who are Tyler Hollenbach, Lynn Siegel, and Mark Eller.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening. I'm here tonight to comment on the responsiveness of the city to overgrown sidewalk obstructions. In the fall of 2021, I chose to commute by foot multiple days per week. I walked roughly 4 miles each day and encountered one particular section of poorly maintained vegetation along Folsom Street, which severely encroached on the sidewalk. The obstruction over the course of several hundred feet meant that it was necessary to walk off the sidewalk and onto a strip of grass or into the street side bike path. It put pedestrians, bikers, pets, and ultimately drivers at potential risk. This was not only an inconvenience, but it was also an accessibility issue and may have robbed residents with disabilities of their ability to reasonably use the public right-of-way. On the Boulder Services website, there's a function to report overgrown sidewalk and a number to call. I was pleased with how easy it was to find the number and make a report, but unfortunately my report went unanswered for almost an entire year. I also know that another individual made a report on the same section. City Ordinance 8-6 indicates that encroachments into the public right-of-ways are public nuisances. 8-6-8A4 provides that there will be 8 feet of vertical clearance and 18 inches of side clearance on all sidewalks. City Ordinance 6-2 indicates that brush and shrubs should be maintained so as not to collect trash, debris, and rubble. Unfortunately, the issue on Folsom Street violated the legislative intent of both of these ordinances. Under those ordinances, the city, upon becoming aware of an infraction, is to request that the adjacent property owner adhere to the ordinance, or the city can clear the nuisance themselves and assign the cost to the owner. The ordinance operates on both a short timeline and aims to resolve these in 7 days. Given the city's emphasis on sustainability and encouraging the use of walking and bike paths, I ask that the city improve its responsiveness and ensure that the maintenance of paths and walkways in accordance with the city's own ordinances for the health and safety of all Boulder residents.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you.
Now we Lynn Siegel, then Mark Eller.
Before you start, I need the timer.
Lynn, I have the timer. It's on your screen, and I pinned it, so you should be able to see it easily. Can you see it? I'm not sure what else I can do. If you change your view to gallery, then you should be able to see it that way. There's a button in the top right corner.
So, Lynn, I'd suggest maybe a timer on your phone, but we should proceed, please.
When are you starting?
As soon as you start talking.
First of all, I don't know how many times I've complained that tonight you had 14 minutes of public participation so far. You'll get one more. Or no, it's actually less than that. You're supposed to have 45. What gives? Not even an answer in years of my complaining. Years. Now, tonight you're evaluating Scope, S-T-O-K, the developer at 22 and Pearl. Last night at the Landmarks Board, I heard them also going for another bit of affordable middle income housing. And what they're doing at 22 Pearl is 45 units. There probably should be 10 there. Each one is 300 square feet, no parking space, for $1,700 to $2,600 per month. That's the area median income of 80 to 120%. This is filling the huge amount of basically unaffordable housing that we have in Boulder. It's not helping the middle. If the middle is $125,000 a year, then all it's doing is drawing up more housing into high income levels, because the area median income in Boulder is high. And it's not, the people that live here are not indexed in their rent to that high income. So what you get is a discussion of hours that you had on the 24th about homelessness. And you're going to look to the county, you're going to look to somebody else. But you know what we need to start doing? This is an international problem.
Your time is up, Lynn, but thank you for your testimony.
Where it starts. Boulder starts here.
Thank you. Last speaker is Mark Eller.
Hi, Council. My name is Mark Eller, and I live and work in the city of Boulder. I'm the president of Boulder Community Rowing, a nonprofit rowing club that's associated with Colorado Junior Crew. So, Council, if I came to you tonight with a proposal that Boulder's trails and open spaces should be prioritizing motorized recreation like dirt bikes and ATVs, and that activities like hiking and bicycling should get priority on the trails for just a few hours a week, I wouldn't get very far with that suggestion. But that's exactly the management strategy currently in place for the reservoir, where the vast majority of open hours favor motorized recreation like water skiing and powerboating. Imagine that your favorite trail in Boulder was only open for hiking without traffic from dirt bikes and ATVs on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9 to 11 a.m. and on Sundays until noon. That is exactly the scenario that rowers, paddlers, and swimmers, other quiet users of the reservoir as well, we all face. The reservoir staff will say that anyone can use the water when high-speed uses are allowed. But that's like saying the trails are open to everyone and dirt bikes and ATVs will probably move out of the way while you're out on a hike. Quiet sport users like swimmers and rowers have traditionally paid the city for access to the reservoir in the early morning hours, but the demand for these hours is incredibly high, so the city charges us ever-increasing rates. In 2023, the rate will be $279 an hour, tenfold what we paid just a few years ago. The effect of this is to once again prioritize motorized, high-speed recreation over human-powered activities. I believe this is out of line with the values most Boulder residents share. I hope you'll consider recommending to staff that no-wake hours should be significantly expanded and not just during work or school hours. That would bring huge benefits to Boulder's human-powered recreation scene. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mark. So I'll turn to our city manager or city attorney to see if there are any follow-ups.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple things. One is I wanted to thank Michelle for her sharing prior to the meeting and her vulnerability as she expressed herself today, so thank you. I wanted to mention to folks that our Director of Parks and Recreation is not with us at the moment, but I understand that she has been meeting with both the Boulder Community Rowing and Boulder Aquatic Masters, and this issue of the fee policy will actually be coming to council very shortly here in an upcoming meeting, so there will be more detail on that. And then I just wanted to appreciate the comments regarding obstruction of sidewalks and pedestrian pathways. I know that we as staff take that seriously too, and we will continue to improve and figure out ways to enhance those efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuria. Any council follow-ups? Nicole?
Yeah, I just have one follow-up question for you, Nuria, and it's around the fee policies for the rowing and things. My understanding is that those contracts are coming up real soon that folks are supposed to sign, and so I was just wondering if that's going to come to us before folks are expected to sign those, or if you have a sense of that.
I don't know what the timing is, but I do know that we are expected to have that conversation, and I want to say it's in April, so it is coming up fairly soon here as I move forward. And I know that the topic of conversation on what do we provide subsidies for and for what purpose and in terms of our equity lens and what we're doing, I think will be part of that conversation. But I can follow up with you and let you know when those contracts are coming specifically.
Yes.
And then I just wanted to check in a little bit on the sidewalk obstruction that was brought up. A year seems like a very long time. I assume that's not what we typically see in terms of how long it takes to respond to those kinds of issues. Do you have any idea what we're looking at?
I
these
don't, and
days?
I'm happy to follow up on that. I find it, I don't want to discount the color, right, because I haven't looked into it. It seems to me that if there is an obstruction in a sidewalk where we know strollers or wheelchairs are going, that we would not let it go on for a year, but I don't know. And so we'll be taking a look at those service levels and appropriate times.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. I was going to ask the same question, so thanks for that. All right. Seeing no other council questions, then Emily, if I could turn to you for our consent agenda, please.
Absolutely. Next on tonight's agenda, we have our consent agenda, and that is item 3A regarding the Enclave property at 2415 Vine Place, which includes the adoption of Resolution 1326 and first reading of Ordinance 8572.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on this consent agenda item? Or a motion even?
I make a motion to pass tonight's consent agenda.
Sorry.
We have a motion and a second. This is a roll call vote. So Emily, if you could.
We'll start the roll call on tonight's consent agenda with Mayor Brockett.
Yes.
Councilmember Folkerts.
Yes.
Friend.
Yes.
Joseph.
Yes.
Councilmember Spear.
Yes.
Weiner.
Yes.
Yates.
Yes.
And Councilmember Benjamin.
Yes.
The consent agenda is hereby approved unanimously with a vote of 8-0.
Thank you, Emily. And so now if you could take us to our call-up check-in, please.
Next, we have our call-up check-in. That is number 4 on tonight's agenda. Item number 4A is the concept plan review and comment for proposed mixed-use redevelopment at 2206 Pearl Street in the MU3 zoning district to include 45 efficiency living units and commercial space along Pearl Street. The application proposes an approximately 64% residential parking reduction, providing 17 residential spaces where 45 are required. This is reviewed under case number LUR 2022-00054.
Great. And then I'll turn, Neri, I believe we have a presentation on this one. Short presentation.
I believe so. I thought Charles would give the presentation, but
Sorry, hi. This is Chandler Van Skok.
excellent.
I'll be giving the presentation. I'm having a little trouble sharing my screen. It's saying that it's disabled.
Well, let us get that addressed.
Let me fix that for you, Chandler.
Thanks,
Sorry
Chandler.
about that. I didn't realize you were sharing yourself. You should have permission now.
Okay.
And Chandler, before you get started, I think the applicant is an attendee, but probably should be made a presenter so she could answer questions if necessary. That's Danica Powell. It's in the attendee list.
Yes, Danica is here, I believe. Can everyone see my screen? In presentation mode?
Yes.
Or is it still showing?
It is in presenter mode.
Okay.
So if you click the the circle with the 3 buttons, you should be able to swap them.
Are we able to get this on the screens in the chambers?
Yes, sir. I'll bring them right up.
Thank you.
Oh, here we go. Sorry, everyone. Trying to share review the presentation.
That looks good.
Okay, yeah, I can't see my notes, but I can move forward anyways. Good evening, council members, and thanks for joining here. I will be presenting a call-up item for 2206 Pearl Street concept plan review. Okay, sorry, folks.
Chandler,
no.
would you prefer that we move it from here so that you can have your notes? Or are you good?
This is fine. So just very quickly, I'm going to go over concept plan purpose, public notification, planning context, project background, a summary of the proposed project, and then a summary of the planning board hearing. So as you know, the concept plan purpose is just to review and provide feedback on a general development plan, including land uses, general circulation patterns, methods of encouraging alternative transportation, architecture, environmental preservation, etc. Intended to give the applicant comments from the public, city staff, planning board, and council early in the process. The purpose of this item is for the city council to consider whether to call up the above referenced application for review and comment at a public hearing. The call-up period expires on March 7th. So in terms of public notification, written notice was sent to property owners within 600 feet. Notice was also posted on the property. Staff received multiple comments during the review process expressing concerns about the proposal, specifically regarding parking density and affordability. Prior to the public hearing, planning board and staff also received several emails in support of the efficiency living units and the level of intensity on the site. Emails expressed the need for housing moving away from encouraging vehicular use and supporting micro units. So in terms of the project location, as you can see here, the site is located on Pearl Street between 22nd and 23rd. The BVCP land use designation is high density residential, and the corresponding zone district is MU3. This is considered a high density zone district. It's designed for areas of the community that are changing to a mixture of residential and complementary non-residential uses generally within the same building. In terms of the surrounding context, you can see here, it's fairly varied. There's some high density residential and a mix of uses as well as single family homes. This is the existing site. As you can see here, the site is well served by transit. And this map shows existing bicycle and pedestrian facilities. So there are existing bike lanes near the site as well as multi-use paths. So the proposed project is for 45 efficiency living units. These are units that are 300 square feet with a maximum occupancy of 2 people. The proposed building is 3 stories, 38 feet tall. It's proposing 17 regular parking spaces, which is a roughly 64% parking reduction. This includes 8 tandem and 1 car share space. And then there's also commercial space on the ground level. So ground level, there would be 2,100 square feet of commercial space, a plaza, a parking garage, what the applicant is calling a dog area, and 5 units. On level 2, we have a common plaza, a resident common room, and an additional 20 units. On level 3, there's a roof deck, PV solar awning, and an additional 20 units. Here are some architectural renderings showing the proposed project from Pearl Street and from 22nd. So the planning board hearing took place on March 7th, 2023. The planning board heard presentations from staff and the applicant and asked questions following each presentation. There was testimony from 10 members of the public regarding the concept plan. 4 people spoke in support of the proposal, saying it provides much needed housing and that the proposed size and number of units promotes market rate affordability. And 6 people spoke against the project, expressing concerns about the parking reduction and overflow of cars into the adjacent neighborhood and right-of-way parking. They also expressed concerns about the intensity of the use. The planning board discussed 3 key issues at the public hearing. The first is the proposed concept preliminarily consistent with the goals, objectives, and recommendations of the BVCP. Key issue number 2 was, does planning board have feedback on the proposed parking for the project? And key issue number 3, was, does planning board have feedback on the building design and site layout? So regarding key issue number 1, the board generally found that the project meets the goals, objectives, and recommendations of the BDCP, particularly in terms of the project helping to provide a variety of housing types within the city. However, there was some concern expressed regarding the long-term affordability of the units, given that they are not proposed to be deed restricted. Regarding key issue number 2, the board was split on whether the requested parking reduction of 64% was appropriate or not. There was general agreement that the applicant will need to provide a very robust transportation demand management plan at the time of site review to support the parking reduction. And strategies such as eco-passes, leases requiring no vehicle ownership for tenants, enhanced car and bike sharing opportunities, and other creative solutions that disincentivize vehicles were suggested. Regarding key issue number 3, the board agreed with staff's comments and found that the site design is generally consistent with the surrounding area. Building architecture will be a major focus during site review. The board found that additional consideration should be given to landscaping and planting materials, and thought given to how open space will function. The board found that building mass and scale are generally appropriate. The applicant should use long-lasting, high-quality materials consistent with the reference images in the application. And additional comments express the importance of natural light within the units, as well as ample storage and common space within the buildings. So next steps, if this is not called up by City Council, the applicant will move forward to site review submittal. Site review will be referred to DAB and will require, which is the Design Advisory Board, and will require a decision by Planning Board, subject to call up by City Council. If it is called up by council, the concept plan will be scheduled for a council hearing within 60 days of the call up date, and council will be able to provide additional feedback at that time. City Council also has the authority to refer the concept plan review to the Design Advisory Board and or the Transportation Advisory Board for their respective opinions, with or without a call up. And that is all I have for the presentation.
Thanks very much, Chandler. It's good to be working together again. It's been a little while. So,
indeed, good to see you again.
And so, for a structure, I'll say we can ask questions of Chandler and or the applicant. Danica Powell is present here to represent the applicant, and then we can decide whether or not we want to call it up. And as we do that, if we do not call it up, people are also free to offer comments instead of a call up. So I'll look to start with questions. Bob.
I have a question for the applicant representative. Danica, does your client desire that this concept review be called up by council, or did your client receive adequate input from planning board?
Thank you for the question. I think we had a really great discussion with planning board, and we feel like we got adequate input. We would, if you're willing to weigh in on the parking reduction or the units, we'd be happy to take your comment. This is a different type of project for downtown. It's not a by right large condo project. That's why we're in site review and use review for the smaller units and the parking reduction. And we do have tandem spaces and a car share space, and we plan on doing a lot of TDM, but we'd love to hear any additional comment that you have, since this is a different type of project for downtown.
Thanks, Danica.
Any other questions? Lauren?
You mentioned that there are tandem spaces. When that is taken into account, what is the parking reduction if those spaces are counted?
It's a 42% reduction with the tandem spaces. And we also have a car share space. Our code doesn't account for car share yet, but in Denver, it's typically 5 spaces per car share is what they're using in their new parking code. And so we haven't accounted for that, but with the tandem, it would be a 42% parking reduction.
Thank you for that. And additionally, Planning Board had made some other recommendations regarding creative solutions to ensure sort of a reduced parking need. Are there any other options that at this point the applicant is looking at pursuing?
I think all of them. We're actually interested in having more than one car share space on site, and I think the car share program is also interested in that. electric bike charging and really putting the bike first, extra bike parking. We would be limiting parking through the leases and also having kind of as the applicant who's not here tonight, so I'm representing him, would describe it's a parking buddy program. So using technology to really help facilitate those tandem spaces. Stoke is a very sustainably minded company, and so we really want to figure out new ways to implement, people's lifestyle. Oftentimes, even with the size of the units, people might want a less cluttered life and not a car-free life, but also providing lots of gear storage and places for people to put toys, e-bikes, bikes inside the units, etc. So I think that's our marching orders moving forward, is really how to figure out how to facilitate that in this development.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Tara.
Hi, Danica. What is your plan for how the bicycles and the e-bikes are going to be stored? Like what mechanism?
The architect is also on the call. I don't think he's been promoted as panelist. It's DTJ Lee Payne. If you see him, I believe he's online. There's a mix of parking, long-term parking in the garage, storage units, as well as bike racks and bike. I believe we're looking at an integrated bike parking in the units as well. And so extra bike parking, and again, we haven't gotten to that detail phase. Lee just got promoted. So Lee, do you want to jump in and add any color to that description?
Hi, thank you for the intro. I timed out a little bit during your talk there, Danica, so I'm not sure if you covered everything, but I believe the question was, what is our bike parking strategy for the project? Is that right?
No.
Okay, so
Nope.
we are
Sorry, Lee, Tara, something else.
Specifically bike storage. So I'm thinking about bike security.
Yes, ma'am. We are providing for these 45 units a total of 92 bike parking spots. There'll be 24 that are generally associated with public use or visitors. Then inside the project, each unit will receive 2 bike spots, one within their unit that's kind of a wall mount condition. And then adjacent to the parking area is an additional 23 spaces.
And those would be secured
Those are all within
spaces. If I don't know if that's specifically your question.
Those are all, so 45 plus 23, whatever that is, those are all within a secure enclosure for the residents.
Rachel, I bring that up because remember you went to that European bicycle security conference, and there were all these innovative ways to store bicycles more securely than we do here in the United States. So I'm looking for innovation in that way.
Mm-hmm.
May I colloquy and ask a follow-up question?
Please.
Mayor Brockett?
Yes.
Danica, would you like me to share information from the bike?
I would love it. Yes, that would be really interesting. Thank you. And that's the type of, uniqueness we're trying to create with these. These units are very different. They would be furnished. They would have very modular furniture. It's a different way of living. And I think that bike and maybe not just bikes, scooters, what are those little things that are people mono balance on, anything that's micro mobility, I think will be very integrated into this project. So I'd love to hear about what Europe is doing.
Look forward.
Thank you.
Great. And Danica and Lee, if you could just formally introduce yourselves, I'd appreciate it.
Thanks, Aaron. I'm Danica Powell with Trestle Strategy Group, representing Stoke Development Group, the applicant.
I'm Lee Payne with DTJ Design here in Boulder. I'm a partner and the director of architecture.
Great, thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands raised, so then I'll ask council, is there any interest in calling this up? And absolutely we can make comments, but first I'm not seeing anybody raise their hand to call it up, and so then we could offer, I would welcome if people want to give a couple of comments to the applicant before we wrap up here tonight. So Lauren, if you wanted, sounded like you wanted to say that.
I do want to. Thank you. And thank you to the applicant for bringing forward this unique project. While this kind of car light, small scale living isn't right for all residents, I think it's really important that we have this option and that, that is a great location for it. I'm excited that it sounds like you're listening to particularly the planning board's comments around creating creative solutions to help people live car light. And at this point, I would support the parking reduction that we're seeing, and especially, taking into consideration that the parking reduction isn't actually as significant sort of as it reads on paper, the tandem parking spaces. I use those at my office. They're legitimate parking spaces, in my opinion. And then I also thought that the floor plan and the way you have the building relating to the surrounding streets and communities made a lot of sense. I do hope that you continue to look towards making the facade more unique and interesting. I think that, we're at a very early stage and it's mostly massing, but it would be great to see something more dynamic happening sort of with the roof line and railings that were starting to be shown.
Great, thanks. Matt?
Lauren's comments are spot on. I would add that this is exactly the kind of project I'd love for us to automatically be referencing tabs input with such a focus on mobility innovation and reduction of car use and really trying to innovate on how people move around the community differently. And the uniqueness of this space. I'd love to get tabs input just because of those issues. And just furthermore, again, automatically, we'd like to get tabs input on things that are so mobility focused. That would be my love going forward versus having to ask for it when we find these unique, awesome projects. So thank you.
Thanks. And I'll just call on myself and agree with what my colleagues have said, and just to say I do support the parking reduction. I think given the incredible wealth of services accessible by foot and bike and transit here, the parking reduction is absolutely supportable. And then just as you're going to have to be creative with the transportation demand management plan. So looking forward to seeing what you come up with there. That second car share spot sounded like a great idea, for example. So throw that there. If we do want to refer it to tab, I believe that requires a motion. So sorry, Sandra, do we have to do that formally? Yep.
I make a motion to refer this to tab for their wisdom and input.
Do you have a second? No.
Second.
Go ahead, Tara.
What about DAB?
It's already being referred to DAB.
Excellent, because I agree with Lauren on more unique architecture in some of our newer developments would be great.
Great. Okay. And I'll just add, I'll just call myself in as a comment there that I think the place for them to focus is on the TDM plan, right, rather than connections, transportation connections and such. Okay, so we have a motion to refer this to tab with a second. All in favor, raise your hands. And it seems to be unanimous. I can't see Junie, but Junie, do you want to just say aye or nay?
Yes, what do you want me to say?
Just to referral to tab, if say yes or no, please, if you wouldn't mind.
No, I welcome that. I think that's a great idea.
Okay, we'll count you as a yes. Thank you. So
Thank you.
That's unanimous then. And with that, I believe we are done with this item. Danica?
Question about the DAB timing.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So can we clarify when these are going to go to tab and DAB? Because I think there was a project recently where we looked at them at concept review, and then we had another review later on, and we hadn't heard from those boards yet by the time they came back in front of us. So I just want to make sure that these will be going to tab and DAB before they come back to us.
I defer to planning staff on timing.
To Charles or Chandler, do you want to address that?
Sure. Thanks very much for the question. They'll go likely to DAB and tab after they initially submit their application for site review. So by the time it gets to an approval phase and comes before both planning board and city council for an eventual call up or a hearing, they'll have been reviewed by both of those entities.
Thank you.
Great, thanks for that, Charles. And just before we wrap up, Danica, did you need anything else, or was that clear?
No, we appreciate your time. We know that this is a small but mighty project, and that's why we're here in site and use review. So we appreciate you taking the time to weigh in on it as we will journey forward, and see you after Tab and Dab. Thank you.
See you then.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks, Lee. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of that check-in. So, Emily, if we can go to our public hearing, please.
Yes, absolutely, Mayor. So next we have our public hearing item. That is number 5 on our agenda. Item 5A is the second reading and consideration of a motion to adopt Ordinance 8569, approving supplemental appropriations to the 2023 budget and setting forth related details.
So, council, as our team gets settled here, I'll say ATBs are no stranger to council. There are times when we bring some special adjustment to base forward. Today's will focus on some of the appropriations under ARPA, and we'll have some discussion there. We'll also be looking at an ask that you had made of us for arts and culture funding, library budget revisions, and as you see out in the audience, quite a few leaders in our city, both department heads and other city leaders across the different organizations, departments, sorry. You will see that there's a lot of conversation to have, particularly as we talk about general climate initiatives and the recent climate tax. So have I given you enough time to get settled?
You did.
Thank you very much.
Nicely done.
All right. Good evening, Council. Thanks, Nuria. That was a great introduction. I'm Mark Wolf, our budget officer. I will take you through a little bit of an overview of the special adjustment to base. As Nuria mentioned, you are familiar already. We bring adjustments to the budget annually. There are 2 regularly scheduled adjustments typically in May and November. Sometimes we bring you special ones. This is a special one, depending on the circumstances. Tonight, that is because of the ARPA funding, as mentioned. So we were doing some reappropriations and appropriating Tranche 3 initiatives, which will include guaranteed income. So we'll have a discussion around that. We are appropriating $15.4 million in ARPA dollars. We will talk briefly about arts and culture, as mentioned. I'll walk you through a couple changes to the library budget for this year related to voter action in November, and then some additional security measures taking advantage of the special adjustment coming to us now. And then we'll have a discussion about our climate tax, including our wildfire resilience efforts. So for those that would like to see the numbers, mention the ARPA appropriation. We have the $100,000 for arts and culture, library security and library fund budget gap funding. I'll speak more to that, a little over $500,000 there. We have a one-time transfer, as we'll describe in more detail, where we're taking the former utility occupation tax and the dedicated reserves from bag fee revenues and transferring them to the climate tax so that we have the ability to make expenditures out of one place. So all of that is from the general fund. We're also reducing the general fund appropriation and making climate initiative expenditures out of that new climate tax fund. So just some administrative moving around of money there reflected in the general fund. And then the remainder of the adjustment comes in the climate tax fund, or the newly retitled climate tax fund, where we need to add the additional appropriation for 2023 to reflect the new revenues coming in. And we'll speak more to the uses of those funds. All right. So starting out this evening, we will talk about ARPA. We had a long ARPA discussion in December. That was our 4th touch point with council related to the American Rescue Plan Act funds that the city received, a little over $20 million. We talked about our general framework and process for decision making all the way back in June of 2021. In August, we had initial recommendations for Tranche 1. In February of last year, we talked about Tranche 2 and discussed some of the preliminary recommendations around Tranche 3. And then we concluded our ARPA initiatives in December of last year with feedback on the Tranche 3 recommendations and ultimately moving those forward with the appropriation of funds this evening. And just as a reminder, we have a lot of exciting initiatives in this last round of ARPA funding, which represents our most significant investment utilizing the ARPA dollars. $2.5 million strengthening our mental and behavioral health safety net, $1.5 million in child care capacity and industry support, $3 million to support a second mortgage program at Ponderosa, $500,000 to support winter sheltering, $1.2 million to continue to support small businesses and economic recovery programming. We reallocated the public health reserve, $400,000 approximately, to continue to support basic needs in the community, and $150,000 to support arts and culture. And last but not least, funding to support the Guaranteed Income Pilot Program at $2.75 million. Council did ask at that December meeting to get a little bit more information on the details of that pilot program before making those appropriations. And with that, we'll have Elizabeth Crow come up, and she will walk you through the pilot project.
Thank you, Mark, and good evening, Council. Elizabeth Crow, serving the city with the Housing and Human Services Department. You heard our Director, Kurt Fernhaber, last week at the midterm check-in share our 2023 HHS mantra is work with joy, and we try to do that every day, and I'm really pleased to be here tonight and give you the update on the Guaranteed Income Project. Joining us virtually, if you do have questions for them as well, are Jordan McGinn and Alistair Scott, who are with Impact Charitable. They're our project management consultants, and hopefully they are joined as panelists. So if when it comes to Q&A, if you have anything for them, they're available as well. Next slide, please. So just for a review, again, kind of overlaying on the schedule or the timeline that Mark shared, city staff proposed this project back in 2022 with the support from many nonprofit community leaders, our community connectors, and many other community members, because we see Guaranteed Income Program's ability to enable longer lasting financial stability and security for community members struggling to make ends meet. While there are many terms to define the concept, guaranteed income is that term of art. There are other terms that include basic income, direct cash assistance, but we have chosen to, for the moment, kind of stick with that, that term because it links us to the Mayors for a Guaranteed Income Network, among others. It's a network that has really expanded exponentially, as Mayor Brockett can attest, to more than 100 mayors all over the country, and a network of more than staff members and leaders who are working on more than 40 pilots. And there are other networks, including one here in Colorado, that bring together other organizations, agencies, and philanthropists, all really centered on promoting and testing this concept and applying and benefiting from the results. What we continue to hear as staff from community members, nonprofit partners, is the power of positive transformation that this kind of project can bring. In addition to the financial assistance that is very restricted, limited use, one time only, which we already provide either directly or through our partners, this type of direct cash assistance is really rooted in that relationship and trust that gives community members the freedom to make the decisions as to how to spend their income. We believe that community members, families, households know best how to do that. And since our last update, I would also note that many Boulder community members are actually, are or may be experiencing even greater financial hardship with the unwinding of COVID-19 public health orders that can come with less funding per household for SNAP benefits or food benefits. There may be gaps as people are re-enrolling for health benefits, given those changes. The county's emergency rental assistance program is winding down, so there's just a lot of need in the community, and we're continuing to see ourselves and through our nonprofit partners that greater need. And the need of people in expanding income ranges, right? People who are still accessing food benefits, reaching out for other forms of assistance who've never had to do so before. Next slide. So I'm really pleased to introduce to you via the photo our community task force seated back in January. 9 community members selected from an applicant pool of 60. We're very pleased about that. Their names are Silas Atkins, Shelby Bates, Magali Botello, Nicole Borelli, Kelly Cuevas, Sheila Davis, Indu Dahal, Rinchen India Love, and Ruby Lopez. And as we desired and as council desired, this really is a group that reflects that lived experience, a very diverse set of experiences, everyone stating that they have multiple connections, either themselves living with low income in Boulder, working with people who do, and who are experiencing a wide range of systemic disparities. So this is really the group that we did and are hearing from, and we're really, really happy about that. They have been working really hard with us, hard work, to really walk through some really challenging issues and help us make decisions that we know are going to benefit many people and also leave some folks out, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. I also just want to note that throughout the process, in addition to hearing from them about specific design elements with the Guaranteed Income Project, they're also really sharing their desire for what this Boulder community can and should look like. And we feel, myself and others on our staff team, really committed to helping amplify those voices. So, you know, some of those concepts are the frustration that people feel when they're repeatedly asked to prove their poverty or feel as though poverty is being politicized, kind of with whatever way the political winds are blowing from one election to another. Really wanting that to see a day when people living out just outside Boulder experience the same quality and compassionate level of services that people have inside the city. When we no longer experience the burden of isms in Boulder, and of course there are many. And we just really appreciate their transparency and trust in us to help elevate their voices, and we expect that to continue beyond this pilot. So now I would like to share some of the details that we've been working on for the project. The first step, and you can click through, I'm a big fan of animations, these immediate outcomes and intermediate outcomes that we've defined in what we call the theory of impact for the project. It just defines what is the positive change that we actually want to see. And reflecting back to the presentations we had last year in the study session in May, and then again in December, our HHS mission, kind of the broad goals that we have, the long-term outcomes for our community, include things like reducing the poverty rate in the city. We don't expect to see that from a 2-year pilot project. And so this theory of impact really provides a much more specific set of outcomes that we hope participants themselves will experience in the short term or immediately, within months perhaps. And then a set of intermediate outcomes, which kind of stack on those immediates. If you can click through, please, Mark, thank you. That are really the next steps. So if an immediate outcome is a decrease in debt, hopefully over the course of the pilot project, we'll have more community members actually able to make that transition from decreasing debt to increasing savings, going from the decreased stress and worry and anxiety to positive mental health and overall wellness improvement. And throughout, that outcome of having a dignified experience is something that we want people to experience from the very moment they hear about this opportunity and apply, all the way through if they're selected to the completion. And those outcomes and those that you see here, more of the community level, are really coming from other pilot projects, right? And we see some of these same outcomes in programs that we currently fund and support here already in Boulder. So not a lot new there. But we also want to see how those outcomes on the intermediate and immediate follow through to community level impact. And what you see here then is even broader sense of economic security and reduction in financial hardship. That can come about, for example, if people have a little bit more of a cushion, so that if and when that emergency comes, they've got actually something put away. They're more able to withstand that kind of financial shock. And usually it takes around $400 to be able to have a household sustain that kind of shock. It also, we see here the potential for community members to be less reliant perhaps on emergency assistance needs. Note that this project and other pilots are designed to be a supplement to any other current social safety net. So our goal is not to have people say, I don't need SNAP, I don't need to be on health benefits anymore, but with those things that I might need, now I'm also in a better position. But can people who are participating potentially not need as much of that emergency financial assistance? We hope so. And that third bullet point also gets back to that, that really kind of larger concept of what is our social contract as a city government with the people we serve who are experiencing low income? Can we put in place and help perpetuate a cycle of trust where we know people are making good decisions, making the right decisions according to their needs, and they see the city government as being more responsive, understanding better what they're looking for and what they need. There are, of course, many assumptions that are baked into this theory of impact. We have to assume, because how can we otherwise, that our economy on the macro level is going to be relatively stable. We certainly hope that the pandemic doesn't take another turn for the worse. We certainly understand that systemic disparities here today are not going to vanish. They're still with us. And any one of those things are really larger and beyond our control, but obviously could impact the outcomes that any particular participant experiences or we might as a community. So we just want to keep that in mind. Lastly, we know that any one participant could experience outcomes in these community impacts in a very different way, but we hope that this will be somewhat of a norm and a trend. So next slide, more click-throughs. Is going to, as it did in the memo, describe a little more of the details about what that direct cash assistance would look like. So basically, first decision was how long are we going to do this for? And the consensus is 24 months. That has been a best practice and really good positive impact from other pilots. One of the reasons is that it gives people more time to make that transition from taking care of the basic needs that decrease in debt to actually thinking forward, doing some planning, being able to make decisions, for example, about work, about education, taking some risks, if you will. And the longer that we're able to provide the assistance, the more people are able to do that. In terms of frequency, the best practice there also is twice per month. That aligns with how many people who work get paid. It's possible that when we set this up, we'll be able to give some flexibility to community members who participate, who would like to have a different cadence or frequency. But ultimately, where we would start is by providing it twice per month. The next, we've landed on $500 per month. There too, we did a lot of scenarios with the community task force to combine the amount, how many people we'd like to have ultimately be able to participate, the length, and the money that we have currently in the bucket. If we're successful as staff in raising more money, getting more investments, that could increase. There are many community members that are really interested in providing more than 500 because of the cost of living here, and many pilots do. But we want to start with at least the assumption it would be 500. And then lastly, just reinforcing again that the terms will be unconditional and unrestricted. And next slide. Getting into the eligibility criteria was really one of the more challenging conversations. Again, I mentioned it was a lot of hard work and heart work for our task force members. The realization that anything we decide, many people are going to benefit, but out of thousands of community members who could be eligible, 200 then suddenly seems like a low number. And so that was really just, I really want to acknowledge the hard work that they did kind of working through how to decide who might be in and who might get left out of this opportunity. So ultimately, we're really looking for a sweet spot at the intersection of expected outcomes for the pilot, which are those outcomes in the theory of impact, the objectives of guaranteed income generally, and then the community needs and gaps. And when we think specifically about those community needs and gaps, it is, of course, the high cost of living here in Boulder, things like inflation and the impact on affording basic needs, the impacts that many community members, again, are going to feel with the unwinding of the COVID benefits that have been in place, and the disproportionate impact on community members who face all sorts of other types of marginalization and discrimination. Layered on top of that, of course, are the still like really wanting to have a process that is dignified, that is a little bit different than people having to continually reapply to provide all sorts of detailed verification, and also to really cast as wide a net as possible. There were some scenarios that we played out with input from the task force members that focused on very specific populations, as well as wanting to serve as many in the general low-income public as possible. So with the next slide, we'll just share again, as is in the memo, some of the details that we were working on. A couple of these things are probably what may be considered no-brainers. There needs to be residency in the city of Boulder. COVID impacted, that's a bit of an ARPA requirement, and we get the verification for that so far has been pretty easy. Sometimes we just ask people, as we did with the Coronavirus Relief Fund, are you COVID impacted? Under a certain income level, the Treasury Department actually expects and assumes that you're COVID impacted. So that's not a high hurdle, but we did have some conversation and got some great input from the task force members about that. Regarding age, we're going to focus on 18 and up. There are pilot projects that focus on teens, focus on youth aging out of foster care. Those are populations that our task force members really felt strongly about wanting to help, and that can add in a whole different layer of complexity if we want to serve them as well as other people in the more general low-income population. And so what we're going to do is focus on that 18 and up age group and really make sure we're doing really great outreach through organizations we partner with, to community members directly in those different populations so that they have the opportunity. And then I definitely want to focus a minute on the income eligibility, which is the trickiest one. Trying to land on what part of our low-income population could benefit from this was really challenging. And at the moment, so I'll say that we're not quite done with those conversations. We definitely feel as though the high end should be 60% AMI. And note that the self-sufficiency standard for Boulder County for a family of 3 is actually around $99,000. So that's a gap between where the federal poverty level is, around 20,000, all the way up to 99,000 are people who we would consider to be in need and experiencing financial challenges. So we're going to continue to have some conversation with the task force. We also got great input from a subject matter expert focus group on this topic. A couple other kind of areas of context to help us land on that income level is that Boulder County is also using some of its ARPA funding for a direct cash assistance program. Do we want to be the same as, or do we actually want to be complementary to that? How will community members understand the distinction between these programs? The good news is that, again, we know that whatever we decide, people are really going to benefit from this. And that for people who are not included, we know that there are other services available in this community already, and we're planning on continuing all of that. Next. So here's some of the next steps, and this is the last slide. Just to let you know, again, the memo includes some more background information and resources or examples of that that we'll be happy to make available to council if you're interested. And we're going to be meeting later this month, actually next week, and then again later in the month with the task force again to finalize eligibility, start getting their input on applications, verification. These are things we've already been talking about in our staff team and with subject matter experts. We also are going to get going on the request for proposals and service agreement models for evaluators. Now that we know what our impact is, once we determine that eligibility criteria, we want to get them going right away because what their guidance and how we would measure to the outcomes, measure to the impacts is really important to put in place as soon as possible. We're also going to be trying again to reach out to some other investors. Most pilots have a combination of municipal dollars or government dollars, private foundations, individual contributors, corporations, and that's our goal here as well, to really make this a broader project that has a greater chance of sustainability if we choose to keep it going after the pilot. Lastly, we're still aiming at summer 2023. That feels close and far away at the same time. And so we've got, again, a great consultant partners with Impact Charitable and hope that this update and any other answers to questions you may have will give you as council members the confidence in this approach so we can move forward. Thank you. Do you want to
Thanks,
keep going,
Elizabeth.
take questions?
I think we'll go through the presentation and
okay.
Then we'll get all the questions at once, if that's okay. All right. So the next piece of direction we received from council back in December related to ARPA was on arts and culture funding. So just to remind you the context here, council did support the additional $150,000 as we reallocated the public health reserve that we had set aside with tranche 1 of ARPA funding. That $150,000 for arts and culture specifically supported a third round of grants for the artist hiring incentive and additional funds for the venue affordability grant program. Council also provided direction to us to identify an additional $100,000 in advance of this adjustment to bring total arts and culture additional support to $250,000 and to consult with the Arts Commission on the use of funds prior to this adjustment. The Arts Commission did support staff recommendations from December in the use of the reallocated public health reserve dollars, and there was additional recommendations from the Commission related to the total amount of funding. They did request an additional $92,000, so that would bring the total level of support to $342,000. That is with the purpose of supporting 5 general operating support grants for organizations that scored well but did not receive funding in the last round of awards. That additional $92,000, just as a note, is not currently included in this budget adjustment, so council would have to add that, amend the ordinance that is before you this evening. And we did visit with the Financial Strategy Committee, as we usually do with the adjustment to base. One of the questions that came up is how we're doing in arts and culture budget support since the acceptance of the Community Cultural Plan, which was accepted in 2018. The cultural plan did have funding targets for 2018, 2021, and 2024. It's represented in the red line there. You can see the target funding. We were fairly close to that target in 2018. With 2018 budget, there was a temporary dip in sales and use tax that impacted the general fund and all sales and use tax supported funds. We were making some progress against that target until COVID hit, and like many areas of our budget, we fell behind our targets for funding, and then we began to catch back up with 2022 and 23. ARPA has certainly helped us do that, but you'll see with a combination of our budget, our capital budget, the ARPA funding, and then the supplemental funding that is under consideration this evening, we're at about $2.6 million proposed for 2023 with the supplemental funding. Compared to that $2 million 2024 target called for in the cultural plan. So a little context there, and I'll note that we have Matt Shazansky if you have any additional questions that I can answer. All right, moving on to the library quickly. Again, just context, with the approval of the library district, we repealed the 0.33 dedicated library mill levy. That was projected to generate $1.4 million of revenue that was held in the library fund in 2023. So we need to cover that gap. The good news is we were able to, we are anticipating to be able to drain down library fund balance to cover most of that gap in 2023. Some of that, the fund balance in library fund was used to support the construction of North Boulder Library Branch. The remaining gap is a little over $300,000 projected for 2023. So we're recommending a supplemental appropriation of $350,000 from the general fund to cover that gap. And I'll just note that our hope, certainly subject to negotiation, would be that the district would reimburse the city for the provision of services in 2023. Separate from the budget gap issue, the timing of this adjustment allows us to address the security enhancements that we discussed with council back in January. Staff is expanding the existing security contract from 3 to 7 security guards and adding patrol of other library branches. The additional amount of security funding needed and included in this adjustment is a little over $230,000. All right, and with that, we will start talking about climate tax implementation, and we will start with Jonathan Cohen.
Great, thanks, Mark. Good evening, Mayor, members of council, community members. I'm Jonathan Cohen, and I am honored to serve as the Director of the Climate Initiatives Department. So I am actually going to be incredibly brief tonight before turning it over to the really smart folks that are sitting behind me to talk about the wildfire element of tonight's conversation. So first I want to start by describing why we're here to talk about the climate tax. You might remember that last November, Boulder voters supported 2 ballot measures related to our climate work. First was 2A that really looked to enhance and accelerate a lot of our investment and work around climate and resilience. And the second was to provide the city the ability to actually issue debt and bond to capture additional revenues for bigger projects in the future if we choose to do so. The climate tax, again, took effect on January 1st of this year. So it replaces, and Mark already made some of these comments, so it's going to be a little repetition here, but that climate tax replaces both the former climate action plan tax and the utility occupation tax. And the tax is going to collect about $6.5 million in revenues annually, and that's levied on the current provider of electricity and natural gas in the city. So again, as I said, the purpose of the tax is really to fund our community's ongoing and enhanced climate efforts and contribute that $1.5 million annually to ongoing wildfire resilience efforts. So if you can go to the next slide, actually go back one, I'm sorry. So again, I think Mark covered a little bit of this, and this is outlined in your memo. I can go through these mechanics fairly quickly. So tonight, this special ATB is really intended to handle some of those housekeeping items associated with the tax. First, the existing Climate Action Plan Fund will be renamed the Climate Tax Fund. I know that's not very creative, but second, the new tax revenues will increase by just over $4 million in appropriation, and the associated accounts are going to be consolidated and reorganized into that one new climate tax fund. In turn, the general fund will decrease by a total of about $2.7 million to reduce the expenditure appropriation, and that was related to the utility occupation tax and the disposable bag fee. So in addition, the general fund will provide that one-time transfer that Mark mentioned in that opening slide of $1.34 million in utility occupation tax reserves and about $775,000 in disposable bag fees reserves to the climate tax fund. So next slide. So while it's not really the purpose of this conversation, I did want to talk super briefly about our investment philosophy. So the ballot measure has a fairly comprehensive, or had a fairly comprehensive list of the measures that the tax would be intended to provide investments into. And if you recall, about a year ago, it was on February 22nd, we had a great conversation with council about the types of things that we think we would accelerate, the types of funding that we would need to kind of move into the space of the big climate moves, the things that we had identified that we didn't necessarily have revenue for at the time. So we've shared this slide, I think, with council a few times, but generally speaking, our investment is aligned with achieving our climate and energy related goals that are listed up on the screen here. There's no exception with the new funding, but I do want to highlight that it's always been our intention to provide direct benefits back into the community, especially those that are most vulnerable to climate change driven impacts. Next slide, please. This is also a slide I think Council has seen several times, but it bears a bit of repeating. Over the past few years, we've really been recalibrating our approach to climate work. So, of course, we need to continue to prioritize those things that are represented on the left-hand side. Those are our climate stabilization efforts, things that we can see direct reduction in emissions. But we know full well that we need to integrate resilience and, of course, center around that design principle of equity. That's really the future of climate action, not just here in Boulder, but every community is really shifting into this space. I also want to get into this a little bit more in the next section, but we do know that the future is going to be fundamentally shaped by climate-driven impacts and disasters, and wildfire is no exception to that. And the city, of course, is a primary provider of public services, and so we're having to turn an increasing amount of attention and resource towards addressing some of these impacts. And we also had to, again, I want to reiterate this time and time again, just to recognize that our investments really need to be directed to those that are least responsible for some of those impacts, but most vulnerable to those impacts at the same time. So again, that's why I think our staff resources are really being dedicated to those resilience efforts moving forward. I also want to make sure I mentioned this at your check-in last week. It's our intention, obviously, I think Council saw a lot of detail around some of our wildfire work that is intended to be invested in the upcoming year in particular. But it is also our intention to really work with community to really understand what their needs are, because they are best suited to tell us what those needs are. So that's part of the conversation that we want to have moving forward. So before I, again, turn the mic over to Brian, I really want to appreciate this cross-cutting work that's been taking place over the past year or so to really build up these teams internally to think about how we address these issues of broader resilience, but specifically around wildfire. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Brian Oliver. He can talk through some of those near-term things that you did see in the IP that came to you a couple of weeks ago, and then hopefully you'll have some questions and we can loop back if you have any on the climate tax or specifically wildfire. Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan. As we transition, just a reminder to speak slowly because we got some translation going on.
Excellent. Again, thanks, Jonathan. Brian Oliver, I am your Division Chief of Wildland Fire for the Fire Department. And so here to talk about the special adjustment to base as it relates to our wildfire resilience efforts. Clearly, the city and all of our partners across departments and even outside the city, we do a lot of work for wildfire resilience. We'll try not to bore you with details. I'll just reference you to the information packet that you got on 216. That should be, take you down a dive of some of those programs and projects and some of those details. But the climate tax is really going to provide us some enhancements to all those programs that are already moving forward. One of the things that is not really part of the enhancements, but something that we've developed to help prioritize and task some of these programs is the development of a core team. So it's across departments, city manager's office, fire department, OSMP, utilities, climate initiatives, Parks and Rec, Office of Disaster Management, sorry, Mike, communications and engagement, and we all meet very regularly to start prioritizing and moving some of these efforts forward so that we're looking at wildfire resiliency not just from departmental silos, but as a city as a whole, and how we can leverage each other's talents and abilities and budgets to help reduce some of these effects of wildfire. With that, we couch all of these prioritizations with the national cohesive strategy that's outlined for wildland fire. It is really kind of our foundational doctrine that drives where we want to prioritize our efforts. Next slide, please. Within that national cohesive strategy are these three strategic goals, which is resilient landscapes, fire-adapted communities, and safe and effective wildfire response. These things are really the tenets of what guide our efforts. Next slide, please. So again, fire-adapted communities, what we're really speaking to is, that we want to be able to withstand or be resilient from those impacts, right? We live in a fire-adapted ecosystem everywhere outside the city. In fact, it requires fire to strive. So fire is inevitable. We're going to have it. What we need to do is prepare for it and be able to respond and lower its impacts. What we're really speaking to is education and outreach here, home hardening, fuels modification directly, adjacent to structures and improvements, things like that. It's really what we're speaking to with fire-adapted communities. Next slide, please. So enhancements with the 1.5 million for the special ATB that we're really looking at is some additional staff capacity to support that outreach effort. And it really gets into supporting and enhancing our home assessment programs, specifically providing some more incentive programs, some assistance to homeowners in the form of maybe grants, connecting them to volunteers and nonprofit organizations to help them do some of that mitigation work, specifically for those that might not have the resource to do those things. And then the really big one is the development of a community wildfire protection plan. We have one that we authored in 2007, clearly quite out of date, so we're doing a serious revamp of that particular plan. And that will be kind of our driving document to start moving forward and getting the community's input on where these priorities lie and what those values are, because it really is a community-driven document to help us move forward. Next slide, please. Again, safe and effective wildfire response. We do all kinds of things in that space. You know, the fire department, along with our other partners. We're talking about standards of cover and our response protocols, agreements with other jurisdictions that have city-owned property within their response areas, and making sure that we're all mobilizing and responding to fires in a very cohesive and effective manner. Our ask there is not very big. Next slide, please. Is really just some technology enhancements to better our response decision making, looking at some weather monitoring and some early detection cameras, just so we can get some better data-driven decision-making tools to ensure that we're responding appropriately and have the appropriate staff for the problem. And then the third is resilient landscapes, and I turn it over to Director Burke.
Thank you, Brian. Dan Burke, Open Space and Mountain Parks Director for the City of Boulder, and nice to see you all, and great to speak with you last week about this subject matter as well. Thank you, Brian. I am going to be representing the third theme or strategy within the city's framework, and that is resilient landscapes. And you can see here on the slide that the definition of resilient landscapes are landscapes that are resilient to fire-related disturbances in accordance with management objectives. And much of this strategy area for the City of Boulder is focused on the natural lands, the 50,000 acres or so of forests, grasslands, riparian areas, wetlands that the city owns and manages, and those beautiful landscapes that sort of embrace and surround our community areas. Really, when it comes to managing and careful and an intentional and comprehensive stewardship of these natural lands, there's really two primary objectives. First is to enhance and maintain the biodiversity and the health of these ecosystems, because what you find is that if you have a healthy, rich, biodiverse ecosystem, they in turn are more resilient to drought and wildfire. But the second strategy of this comprehensive stewardship area is to actually mitigate and minimize the risk of severe and catastrophic wildfire on the system and to our communities. And as Brian mentioned just previously, we in Colorado and our natural systems here specifically are fire-adapted natural communities. They actually have grown up, if you will, with fire in mind, and fire is actually an integral part of keeping these ecosystems healthy. So from a management context, it's an interesting paradox in which fire is an important component to maintaining a resilient, healthy ecosystem, yet we would want to avoid catastrophic and severe wildfire. And so that is the management sort of sweet spot that we're after when it comes to developing a comprehensive management strategies for these natural lands. The other point I want to make before I talk a little bit about enhancements for 2023 is the fact that we have a rich history of managing for ecosystem health and for mitigating fire risks on our system. Really decades long's worth. We have a big collaborative group across the city and across the region and across the state and with the federal government when it comes to that. So a lot of rich experience. So really the goal of the Climate Tax Fund enhancements is to take what we already have and look at those areas where we can enhance them and add to them and analyze if there's any gaps. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Our cross-departmental team, which was assembled with the direction of the city manager in the fall of 2022 to look collaboratively across the area, when this tax passed, we got to work and was looking at what is sort of, now that we're already 2 or 3 months into this year, what in the 9 months can we utilize to put enhancements right on the ground immediately, sort of those shovel-ready projects. And in the area of resilient landscapes, on the screen here, the additional enhancements, we want to prioritize those to expanding the scope and speed at which fuels management efforts are completed on city lands. And this will be enhancing and expanding and increasing our work on forest thinning, on prescribed grazing, on prescribed fire and within our forest and on our grasslands, on weed management, and with ditch management. So those are areas that we think we can get prepared to hit the ground running with the new climate tax funds over the 9 months and really put it instantly into work in regards to the resilient landscapes strategy area. So next slide, please. So just to kind of wrap it up for this portion of the presentation, just to emphasize that our next steps is to obviously continue all of the current citywide and partnership work that we're doing in regards to wildfire resilience, implement the enhancements that have been identified by this cross-departmental group in regards to all 3 of these strategy areas that Brian and I have gone through. And third, I just want to call out again to continue to maintain and enhance our collaboration and our partnerships. We cannot do this in a silo. OSMP as a department, or fire rescue as a department, or climate initiatives. It's cross-cutting. It takes cross-departmental work, and it takes those collaborative efforts across the region with our county partners, with our regional partners, and our national partners. So that's what we're prepared to go to work on, and thank you for your time. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Mark again.
Thanks, Dan. That is it for us. We are ready for questions. And
actually, just before we get to questions, I wanted to recognize that lovely gem that is a City of Boulder and Boulder County person in Director Mike Chard, who is joining us as well, and just noting that he is in the audience. If you have questions for him.
Thanks for being here, Mark, and appreciate the partnership. Mike, sorry, I said Mike. Yep. Thank you for those comprehensive presentations. Really appreciate that. Questions for city staff? Nicole?
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentations. I had the bulk of my questions were around the guaranteed income pilot program, and so I don't know if that means Elizabeth, you are up.
It does.
So one of the things that I was wondering about will be tracking outcomes from the folks who are receiving the funds. Will we have a control group of people who applied that we are also going to be tracking?
It's a great question. At the moment, we're thinking not to go the control and rather focus on a pre-post evaluation. A couple of reasons for that. There are a lot of pilots that are currently taking place that have pretty strong, very, very robust, and I would add very costly evaluation process. Some of those results are ones that you might already be familiar with, like from the Stockton, California project. There are a dozen or so, I think even more than that actually, through the Mayors for Guaranteed Income Network and the Center for Guaranteed Income Research. So we've gotten and will be getting a lot of really strong kind of control group-based evaluation results. We're not quite sure we're going to see a lot that's drastically different from here in Boulder, but to those other projects, the evaluation cost for those can be just $500,000 by itself. And so at the moment, we're taking a different approach. One is also repeated in other pilots that is much more doing pre-post surveys, really getting that storytelling, getting the experiences of the community members out without going that route.
Yep. Okay, thank you. And then I was just wondering about what happens if somebody moves while they're in the pilot?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. And I'll answer that a bit, and then Jordan or Alistair, if they're available, might have something that they would want to add. It is one of those next steps that we'll have to have a pretty comprehensive kind of policy for the project. That could be a scenario. People could move out of the community. They could have a pretty substantial change. Someone who participates, hopefully this doesn't happen, could pass away. There's just a whole bunch of different scenarios to plan for. Fortunately, in this area, again, I've said it before, but there's an advantage to not being first, where there's some really great templates there, but that's definitely one of those next steps. So we can plan for, if not all, most of those eventualities and still have a really good program.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, and then I just wanted to make sure, I think we talked about this before, but this won't impact the other benefits that folks are receiving. Is that right?
That's correct. That is to say that people who participate, it's possible that they would have some impact to benefits that the city couldn't control for. In those scenarios, there are some really great tools that have been developed by the Atlanta Federal Reserve, for example, that enable kind of calculators so that people, when they come into the program, before they say, yes, 100% I'm participating, can provide them scenarios and say, actually, you may be paying more in your rent. You may be impacted in this way. The numbers that we've run and part of these scenarios were how we landed on the $500. That amount is one that even if there is some negative impact, for example, a rent amount might increase, there's still an overall pretty substantial net gain. But running those scenarios ahead of time and being able to tell people fully with all transparency, we can't guarantee it, but this is where you might see some impacts, would be their opportunity to say, yes, I absolutely want to go ahead, or no, I'm a little uncomfortable with that, I'd rather not.
Thank you. And then what counts as a resident? So if someone, for example, doesn't have stable housing, if they are sleeping on the couch of a friend, is that somebody who would be a potential candidate for this program?
So we're at the moment gathering and talking not only with among staff, but also with some of those subject matter experts, organizations like FR, our colleagues at the county, to see like how are we already addressing that situation. Some other examples include the Marshall Fire, where we had to verify whether or not you were actually in a home that was damaged in a particular area. So is it a house? What defines a household? What defines a family? Does that include roommates? Does it not? So we're actually having these conversations right now, and those are some of the immediate next steps. What kind of verification, what kind of definitions will we go with for things like family, household, resident? It seems straightforward, but it's really not. So looking at a bunch of different sources before we land on that definition and make that, again, very clear in the application process.
Thank you. And last one, why exclude students from this? Can you speak to that, especially lower income?
Yeah, so what we have right now is a focus on excluding full-time students. We just know that, number one, there are a number of people in our community who are students, full-time, part-time, who are definitely, you've lived here for a long time, you plan on staying, and you're really experiencing low income. But we also know that there could be a whole additional set of students who don't show as having income, but they're not necessarily low income. They may be still on parents' benefits, just a completely different scenario, even though they may not show, as having any or much income. So this is one way to try to solve for that. I don't think any of us believe that it's a perfect solution, but to really try to keep as much of the focus as possible on households that really are experiencing low income, that don't have other family members or other situations, as someone who's in that age range of just out of high school, here for a few years in college, and doesn't maybe intend to have Boulder as their permanent home.
Yep, and for grad students as well, though, it would exclude them too. Is that correct?
That may be true.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Okay, thanks.
Lauren?
Thank you for the very thorough presentation. It looks like you'll be looking at a pretty wide range of incomes in terms of who might be eligible for this program. Are we going to try and make sure that there are like a percentage from different ranges, or how do you plan on looking at that, or is that still to be determined?
Still to be determined is the short answer. The slightly longer answer is that we've actually been talking about, on the one hand, focusing on that 30 to 60% AMI bracket, which is, and there are several reasons for that, including those tend to be the folks who are really already on that benefits cliff. A lot of benefits really only eligible for people who are lower than 30% AMI up to 50. And again, like that's a population that we know is experiencing a lot of challenges right now. It's not really a level of income that can sustain doing well, thriving here in the city just because of our affordability issues. And also just with other changes that are coming even just this spring, may really feel that impact much more. There's also an argument to be made to go lower. Obviously, those are people, a lot of whom we're already seeing pretty regularly and at high numbers in our nonprofit agencies and direct services. So that's one answer to the question, is we're still kind of trying to figure out how low and what's that specific income range will be focused on. There are a couple of other ways that we can actually address the situation you're talking about, not only by income, but other areas where we really want to be as equitable as possible. So that can come in the process of, after people apply, anyone who's eligible, they're being pretty typically utilizing a randomized lottery system that would actually select the participants. And that's a process that allows us to actually weight, W-E-I-G-H-T, different characteristics or identities. So for example, we know that we have a lot of racial disparity in our community based on race, ethnicity. Is that something that we want to actually look at and say, if you identify, by your race or ethnicity, perhaps your a gender identifier, ability or disability, we don't want to stack so much on that now we have a very complicated application process that requires lots of verification. That would counter having that dignified process. But it can be a way for us to really ensure that we're equitably getting to people who are oftentimes left out of assistance programs like this. And that may be one of those ways we can try to address equitably the income identities if we have a kind of a larger pool. I hope that made sense.
Thank you. You also mentioned that the county is going to have some programs that you don't want to duplicate. Are there any particular ways that's currently affecting your thinking on how this program might be shaped?
Yeah, we are yes and no. So I think what we've already established in terms of age eligibility, kind of the terms, the amount, those we feel like right now are pretty fixed, and the county is still thinking about where they're going to land on some of those areas. One of the considerations is if, for example, by income range, by kind of type of household, if we have two programs that are going at least overlapping somewhat in time frame, how can we make it really easy for people to understand what they're eligible for and what they apply for here in Boulder? Elsewhere in the county, it won't as much be an issue because they'll have one option through the county. But here, it is a consideration, and another is, do we want to have two data sets that overlap for the same population and kind of learn more about the same population, or do we want to complement and have the advantage of two different data sets? And the same is, could be true even for other projects like Denver Basic Income, which is only focused on homeless community members. So again, it's a longer answer, but the short of it is that there are a lot of balls in the air there. We're in really close communication with the county on it, and nonprofit agencies are kind of advising on both sides. So I'm confident that we'll be able to come up with the right decision.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Matt?
On this one? Okay.
Good, fine.
So my question's for either Brian or Mike with regarding sort of our wildfire resiliency. I'm glad that we have the resources to certainly invest in greater resiliency. My question centers around infrastructure. Nothing is cheap in the world of firefighting, I gather, and certainly maybe wildland. So I'm wondering, is there shorter, medium, or long-term plans in building the infrastructure capacity through this tax or other means with regards to maybe wildland firefighting vehicles or other sort of larger infrastructure? I'm just wondering how that side complements our overall resiliency strategy and balance on both sides. Sorry if that's a bit dense of a question.
It's a pretty good question, and I think where we are with the initial ATB and this initial thing is we're just now starting to develop what those strategies are going to be and where we need to take it in the next 1, 3, 5 years. Right now with a pretty quick turnaround, we wanted to just enhance current programs, but some of that infrastructure we're looking at right now is some advanced like weather monitoring technology, again, detection cameras, things like that, and then moving probably into more of a figuring out our staffing model and building some of that in. But as far as larger infrastructure investments, we really haven't made that leap just yet.
Okay. Well, seeing no other questions, let's turn to our public hearing. We have one person signed up for that, which is Lynn Siegel. And so, Lynn, you'll have 3 minutes to speak to us tonight.
Yeah, so when we look at the budget here, and I don't have my timer up still, sorry, I don't know what else I can do. I hover everywhere. There's no place that it is at. And I don't want this taking up my time.
So, Lynn, we just started the clock. Please proceed.
What Boulder needs are impact fees for each person that's added to this community. Impact fees would consist of all the things that were spoken of tonight: climate action, wildfire resilience, rec centers, libraries, meth disasters, everything. Like so many things. Open space, mountain parks, we're in a huge deficit in those funds. As long as you're approving projects like 22 Pearl, you're going to drive up the cost of housing here astronomically more than it is now. Yay, 206. Okay, smaller units do not equal an equal amount of impact as, for example, 22 and Pearl versus Papilio's. And these affect your bottom line, our budget, everything we spend in this city to use for our public. How this is happening, when you've got 300 square feet and someone's living in it, they are gonna want to, and they've got their bike and their dog in that 300 square feet as well. They are going to want to get out of there. They are going to want to go places and do things. And when they do, and they don't have a car, because that $1,700 to $2,600 does not include a car. And a car in Boulder, a parking space, is $897 a month, according to KJID. And I want to know from you, from City Council, what does a parking spot cost in Boulder? Because that's the bottom line here. If you don't want cars in that parking spot, how many homeless people can you fit in that parking spot? How many, in a 300 square feet, you've got a $3,000 per month person living in that. And those spaces at 22nd and Pearl are market rate as soon as the project is approved. So it really doesn't matter if you've got these big giant condos that cost all kinds of money for someone, because you've got an even worse tsunami of affordability coming up with now these new micro units. Wow, my time went by. Micro units do not, you know, they are not the panacea. And LIHTC funds that you're getting from the federal government are just
Your time
like
is up,
heroin
Lynn, but
to a
thank you for your
community.
testimony.
It's extra.
All right, that concludes the public hearing, so I will bring it back to council for discussion of the matter before us. Who would like to kick off our discussion? Okay, there you go. Lauren, thank you.
There may be, I still have a couple of questions. I'm sorry. These are fire-related questions. So in the fire-adapted communities, it spoke about reducing wildfire risk by, one of the items was creating financing and grant tools to assist homeowners and businesses in risk reduction efforts such as roofing and siding replacements. And I was wondering if in that we will be looking at exterior insulation as part of that, just because that has multiple benefits in terms of, you know, reducing energy usage, and also some of those products can also help with fire risk mitigation.
Good question, and I think we'll get there.
Okay.
Currently, you know, again, just going with this initial push is to build that capacity. Right now, there's no programs built, and that's what that staffing increase is to do, is to start developing those programs and looking into a lot of what is the best bang for the buck, and where can we do that cross, you know, dimensional benefit, right? It's going to lower risk. It's also going to lower energy costs, things like that. Again, that's part of that core team's calling, is to do that across the departments and figure out what the best thing is. So we don't have any answers yet, but we're going to get there.
Perfect, thank you. In that,
Can I colloquy on that point?
okay.
Because you were talking about just the resources for residents on that sort of home resiliency.
Yeah.
Unless you're continuing on that line.
I have a cross-departmental wildfire team question that might be in that, but you go for it.
Oh, okay, appreciate that. So it's kind of a question of order of operations with regards to where Lauren was, because it's not just the home itself. I think of also the landscaping, and so thinking about, you know, removal of juniper and high fuel loads within close proximity to the home as a major resiliency aspect. And and I hear you saying that we're trying to build that capacity to start to evaluate that. I guess the question sort of circles back to us too. Do we want to be legislating that ahead of having that staff capacity or the financial resources to help those in need in order to get that ball rolling for maybe fulfilling of those ordinances and self-compliance, more or less? So it's kind of a question of whether or not you think that we'd have the cart before the horse to some extent, because it's more than just the house, it's still built in the landscaped environment as well.
Right. That's fair. And I think where we're going to go, it's funny you bring that up. We're actually going to have a pretty robust conversation at the core team on Monday about junipers and what our policy recommendations are going to be going up the chain, as far as, do we need that ordinance, or can we use the carrot instead of the stick, right? Can we give people the resources and help them help themselves because they want to do it, or are we going to need to, you know, an ordinance or some sort of legislative mandate that says thou shalt, and we're going to have that discussion next week.
And what I hear, if you will, council members, is perhaps a desire from council that as we have those conversations and the core team continues to move forward, that if there are in fact ordinance changes or things that they want to bring to council, that you are receptive to us bringing that as they're appropriate and ready.
Lauren, you have another one?
Yeah, I was also wondering if that cross-departmental team includes transportation staff to make sure that as we work towards encouraging people to move away from single occupancy vehicles. You know, we still have plans for how people evacuate safely and things like that.
That's interesting. Actually, no, transportation isn't on the core team, and maybe that's something we look at, adding them to the table.
Yeah, and I'll say that originally when we thought of this cross-departmental team, it really is focused on wildfire resilience. But the team, absolutely, as it continues to do its work and needs to fold additional members in, they certainly are welcome to do that as we move forward.
Thank you. That's my question.
Well, you have the floor, so would you like to start comments?
No.
I'll call on myself and then, seeing no one else jumping to the fore, and say you all have done a phenomenal job. So really appreciate the detailed work and how we're absorbing and processing the additional resources that the voters have granted us in the last election, which we are very grateful to our voters and taxpayers. Thank you, people of Boulder. And so all kinds of wonderful initiatives going on. Really looking forward to seeing progress on our wildfire resiliency.
After you.
Okay, sure. Which is, of course, a critical concern right now, and will only get worse. So, just basically, thank you, and I support where we're going here. Tara, and then Nicole.
I'm thinking back to when I first got on council and how wildfire mitigation was, and the wildland urban interface was one of our main concerns. Remember, we said we wanted to prioritize that, and how far we've come in just less than 2 years. So thanks to the team, everybody, for all that you did and all you're doing.
Nicole?
Yep, just going to echo all the thanks to everybody here. I am just really thrilled by all these investments that are going in here. I think it really reflects some of the best of our community values. We've got behavioral health, childcare capacity, manufactured housing support, changes to procurement to focus on equity and inclusion, which I really appreciate that one. Increases in arts support, wildfire resilience, thinking about energy equity now, and getting rid of single-use plastics. There is so much good in here, and I am so excited for where this is going to take us. The only thing that I would love for us to consider, and I'm fully supportive of this, don't want to let anybody think that this will hold it back. But I'd really like for us to think about how we can include students as we're thinking about the supports that we're giving to the community. Lots of our students who are here work in our restaurants and our other service industries in our stores, and they're housing and food secure too. And especially for graduate students, they are very often no longer supported by their parents, and yet they don't have enough to get by in our city. And how are we supporting people in those situations? I would just really love for us to be thinking about that, because I think the people that it most impacts are the first generation students and those who are coming from families that don't have a lot of pre-existing wealth, and they are very valuable members of our community as well. So I would just really like for us to keep that in mind as we move forward, as how can we include students, and especially their student workers and those who are supporting our community in other ways in being a part of our community and being able to exist here with some security too. But thank you so much for all that work.
Thanks, Nicole. Matt?
We're in gushing hour right now. So yes, we'll certainly echo my colleagues. I'll just say more specifically, bureaucracy in government often gets the bad rap of not being nimble, not being agile, not being able to quickly pivot to meet needs of their community. This conversation tonight, to me, is sort of emblematic of the contrary, that we have been nimble, we have been able to adapt to the needs of our community as those needs are rapidly changing. So I just want to give a lot of credit to the staff, to city manager's office as well, to get us to a place where we can be nimble and adapt to the needs in our community. So just great job to everyone. Thank you.
Other comments, perhaps a motion? You've got Nicole, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to thank all the members of the Guaranteed Income Pilot Project for all of their hard work to get us to what is a very exciting program for our city. So thank you to all the folks who are here for that.
Anybody else? Junie?
Thank you. I just wanted to echo the thanks as well, based on the memo. The wildfire resiliency program, I welcome that. I think that's great. That's a necessity. Seeing all the different fires that we have dealt with in Boulder County, right? Not just Boulder itself, in Boulder County that has impacted us, and other surrounding counties as well. And also the guaranteed income is something that I'm very excited about as well. And I'm grateful, that the city manager and the mayor has been working on this project as well. So thank you for that, and I'm excited, and I look forward to, to seeing that coming to fruition, and also seeing community getting benefit and access to it. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeannie. Lauren.
I also really appreciate these very thoughtful proposals, the huge amount of behind-the-scenes work that they represent, and your patience with my questions. I would like to motion that we adopt Ordinance 8569 and supplemental appropriations to the 2023 budget.
Second.
I second.
Junie got it. Thanks for that, Lauren. Any final comments before we go to a vote? I'm not seeing anything. So, Emily, if we could do a roll call here, please, I believe.
Of course. We'll start the roll call on tonight's public hearing with Councilmember Folkerts.
Yes.
Friend?
Yes.
Councilmember Joseph?
Yes. Yes.
Spear?
Yes.
Weiner?
Yes.
Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Brockett?
Yes.
And Councilmember Benjamin?
Yes.
Ordinance 8569 is hereby adopted.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for the phenomenal work by ourselves and by our partners. And I'm looking forward to taking the next steps on the guaranteed income program and representing with the mayor's group. So thanks for all your work on that. It's going to be an impressive program, I know. Okay. So we can now move on to our next item, which is a matter from the city manager.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Our next item is item 6A, alternates for the Intergovernmental Affairs Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mayor, and hopefully this will be a quick item. There was some conversation a few weeks back about the possibility or the desire to have an alternate on the Intergovernmental Affairs Subcommittee. I think as I've continued to converse with various of your colleagues, there was perhaps interest in other city-appointed committees that perhaps people wanted to bring forward. And so what we would recommend is, because those committees are actually formally voted on, they require in your rules to be noticed, put on the agenda and voted on formally, that we should also similarly vote for alternates in those committees that you so choose. I don't think every committee necessarily needs to have an alternate, although certainly if that is your desire, we can do so. And if it is the will of council, we can work with CAC to schedule that and bring that forward again.
Great. And so are you just looking to us for a nod to say, yes, come back to us at a future meeting?
That would be perfectly lovely.
Do people want to nod and say yes? Can you please do that?
Nod.
Yeah. Thumbs up? Okay. I'm seeing some thumbs up over here. Very good. So please do. And Sandra?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just want to make sure and check in with council to see if there's any interest in wanting to make any changes to the council rules of procedure that would clarify the procedure that you are contemplating.
Do you feel that it's necessary in order for us to do so?
I don't think it would hurt. We're already doing some related to Mayor Pro Tem, so I could certainly bring those at the same time.
Seems reasonable to me. What do people think? Getting nods. I'm seeing nods. So, Rachel?
Yeah, I think it's fine. For at least a couple of the committees, it seems like it might be time sensitive. So that's my only question: is how quickly would we get to this? Like for legislative affairs, that expires in a couple months, right?
Thank you for the question, council member friend. I don't think that it would necessarily require passage of the council rules of procedure change in order to have that action. But I am planning on bringing forward those changes to the council rules of procedure at the next business meeting. So we could probably do them both at the same time.
So it's just 2 weeks then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, and then maybe just for CAC's awareness, like I think at least a couple that I'm thinking about are probably time sensitive.
Duly noted.
Thank you, Council.
Good. That was easy. All right, now we have a couple matters from the mayor and members of council.
Yes, thank you so much. Our next item is item 8A, and that is the downtown vision plan.
Great. I might turn to my colleague Bob Yates here. This was an invitation that he initially extended. So, Bob, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Just by way of background, we're about to hear a presentation of the downtown vision plan. This is a plan that's been worked on for probably better part of a year by several members of city staff and actually several members of council. The downtown Pearl Street Mall just celebrated its 45th anniversary and is now creeping up on its 50th anniversary. So this is a very good time to be reflective of what downtown looks like, not only on Pearl Street but the surrounding areas. There's a couple of other things that are happening kind of at the same time. We all might remember that about a year ago, our voters approved an extension of the Community Culture, Safety, and Resilience Tax, which dedicated $12 million towards refreshing the Pearl Street Mall and redeveloping the civic area. So that money is being planned for expenditure by several members of city staff in partnership with the Downtown Boulder Partnership. I think in a few weeks we're going to hear from our colleagues who are serving on the Downtown Streets as Public Spaces Committee, and so lots of engagement around that. We, of course, have a conference center coming in right up the hill from downtown, and our transportation staff is studying mobility options there. As you'll hear in a second, there are 4 downtown boards that worked on this. As a matter of fact, there are 4 council members that actually worked on the vision plan. You're about to hear Matt and Mark serve on the Business Improvement District Board. Tara and I serve on the Downtown Boulder Community Initiatives Nonprofit Board. And a lot of staff members, including Chris Jones, who's here also tonight, who I think can provide some context if you'd like. The presentation is going to be by Chip, who's the CEO of those boards. And I think we're going to hear from Chip about the process and community engagement, about how this plan was put together, some big ideas embedded in the plan, and some pathways for implementation. There's no action by council tonight. This is really an informational item. But we wanted to share with those members of council who didn't work on the plan, and also the broader community who might be watching tonight, and hear from Chip on what the plan looks like, and maybe express some enthusiasm. So it's all yours, Chip.
Thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate that, and thank you all for the opportunity to come share this work that, as Bob mentioned, many of you have been involved with. We spent the bulk of last year having this conversation about the vision. We're going to speed through a lot of these slides.
Although, if you can start by formally introducing yourself with your full name and your role, please.
I will, absolutely. So go ahead in the next slide, and I'll introduce my full name. You can call me Chip. I'm Chip. I'm the CEO of the Downtown Boulder Partnership. And as Bob mentioned, we are multiple organizations. We are not part of the city, but we like to pretend we are. We're very strong partners of the city. We have a number of organizations: our Business Improvement District, Downtown Boulder Partnership, our Community Initiatives nonprofit, and our Community Advisory Board, all working together in a lot of different capacities to make and keep downtown awesome through a number of efforts. Go ahead, next slide. This is not a city plan. The vision plan is not a plan of the city, though it's a plan of the Downtown Boulder Partnership. It would really not be what it is without the strong partnership and support of the city council members, as well as city staff. So I really want to acknowledge the gratitude for the support and partnership in the conversations for developing a plan for the community for our downtown. Go ahead, next slide. I'm going to race through this. So why did we do a vision plan? I think a lot of it was pushing and pulling, really looking at, as Bob mentioned, last year was the 45th anniversary of the Pearl Street Mall, which has been a great success of a downtown. Downtowns all over emulate or try to emulate what we have tapped into here in our downtown in a number of ways, in the design and the management and the ecosystem that is downtown. So really building on our success of the past, but also it's a new day. Things have changed since the last few years. Everything about downtown has changed. Our retail, all over the place, it has changed. People are spending a lot more money online. How retail operates is different. Our whole restaurant industry is different. How we use office space has transformed. How we use public space has greatly transformed. How we engage with each other in community in many ways has transformed. So what does that mean for the downtown moving forward? And also looking to the future. It was the 45th anniversary. My math says there's 5 years till now, less than 5 years, a little more than 4 years till the 50th anniversary. So really taking advantage of that extraordinary milestone to have a conversation about what is our downtown, how does it serve the community, how does it serve the people of Boulder and the community of Boulder. So we're very excited to take this on and really look at it as a 5-year vision, ramping up to the 50th anniversary of the Pearl Street Mall, but expanding beyond the mall and looking at downtown. Go ahead, next slide. We're very fortunate to engage the services of MIG to help consult with the process. We did a competitive bidding process and really looked at MIG was a fantastic fit. They've done a lot of other work in Boulder and really have a relationship with Boulder, but at the same time have a global reach, and we're able to bring some best practices and help us with strategy and the vision and communication. Go ahead, next slide. At the same time, we really wanted it to be specific to Boulder and make a lot of sense for our community. So we had a vision plan steering committee to guide the process, including representatives from each of our boards, as well as city staff, leadership from Community Vitality, Parks and Recreation, and Transportation, and 3 at-large community members as well. Next slide. So with that, we started the process by getting as much input from as broad of a community as we can. Go ahead. Starting with our stakeholders, we had some really interesting conversations with our joint boards, stakeholder surveys, engaging the property owners, business owners, employees, residents, neighborhoods, charettes, and a lot of focus groups. We talked with employees, we talked with county residents, we talked with CU community members, and got a lot of information that way. And next slide, went out to the community quite a bit. We had a lot of engagements at events. I know I saw many of you at some of them. We were able to set up at our events downtown at Bands on the Bricks and events at the band shell last summer. But we also wanted to make sure we weren't just asking our fans and the people who are already coming downtown. So we spent a lot of time going out into the community and doing engagements in North Boulder at the First Friday. We spent a day at Scott Carpenter Pool, at all of the rec centers. We crashed a few parties at Boulder Housing Partners events. We were at Feet Forward's outreach. Pretty much anyone who would talk to us about downtown Boulder, we wanted to listen. Go ahead, next slide. So our outreach comprised of a lot of different activities, asking community members about vision, prioritization of some of the things we started to hear, and kind of refining that. Go ahead and with the next slide there. And then also online, we were able to utilize the city's great Be Heard Boulder resource, and we got hundreds of engagements online and in some social media as well. Go ahead, next slide. And then this has all been very much a consolidation of a lot of work that's been done. We're not starting from zero. So a lot of the input was, as you can see here, numerous recent plans, some city plans, some documents that we put together from the Downtown Boulder Partnership in our groups, and kind of put that input into the plan as well. So that's the input, and now is the drum roll moment. Here's what we have learned. Our vision, go ahead, next slide. this is our vision statement. The bumper sticker version of our vision is to grow downtown's reach, community, and success. And the vision statement that was revealed in this process that we spent a lot of time discussing and talking about, as you see on the screen, downtown Boulder is a vibrant mosaic of human-centered places and sub-districts that provide diverse experiences and opportunities for all through deliberate inclusion, innovation, and co-creation. So I'm very proud of the process and the product, and that is the vision. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the action recommendations and strategies that came out of this plan to really achieve and live this vision, which I think is a really exciting vision. So how are we doing so far? I love being the last thing on the agenda because that means I can go on all night, right? Is that what that means?
You have 3.5 minutes left, Chip. Please stick to it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we're going to talk about some of the big ideas. We came up with sort of 6 big ideas that concentric out. Next slide. Before I touch on those, we had these filters that we kind of put the big ideas through as we developed the big ideas, really looking at, of these proposals, these action ideas proposals, do they have a positive long-term as well as short-term impact? We really talked about, do the recommendations provide more access? Are we providing more access, physical access, social access, financial access? And how do these proposals meet the vision? We're very proud of that vision statement, but we really want it to live through these proposals. So how do that? And then of course, how might the proposals be harmful unintentionally, and to who, and how do we mitigate that and really look at alleviating the inequitable impacts or potential harm. So let's talk about some big ideas. Go ahead, next slide. So as I intimated, the ideas sort of begin in the center and build out. And here they are, starting with the Pearl Street Mall and really positioning the next 50 years for success. But then looking beyond the mall to facilitate discovery, activation, and opportunities off of the Pearl Street Mall, expanding into the Creek Corridor, really embracing that extraordinary asset that we have right here adjacent to our downtown, and really make it not adjacent. It's part of our downtown, and how do we embrace that? And continuing out, we have amazing other neighborhoods, commercial districts, residential neighborhoods. How do we most appropriately and effectively connect with the rest of Boulder on a physical level, a mobility level, but also a psychologically level? How does downtown serve the other commercial districts and residents and neighborhoods? Tie it all together with safe, comfortable, and interesting infrastructure, and then telling the story of increased understanding. So I'm going to touch on each of these briefly. Go ahead, next slide. In terms of positioning the Pearl Street Mall, I think let's keep going. I have slides for each of this. On the Pearl Street Mall, really reimagining the 1300 block. For context, the 1300 block is sort of the center of the center. It's the block that the county building is on. We have a number of our events. I expect to see you all at Bands on the Bricks every Wednesday in the summer. And it's where our visitor information center is. It's where our public restrooms are. It serves a number of functions. And there's an opportunity, we believe, to look at how we use that space and how we really reimagine it in ways that it can do more and do all of the things that it does even more effectively. So we're excited about that conversation. That's a conversation where we're beginning, as Bob mentioned, there's some Pearl Street reinvestment funds that the voters approved last year that we hope to inform how to engage the community in that conversation. And importantly, our partners at the county, as a big part of that block is theirs, and the functionality of that block is important to so many different activities and functions. So we're excited about the possibility of the 1300 block. Next slide. Moving a little bit of east from there to the 1400 block, I think one of the things we really talked about is the East End and the opportunity that exists on the East End of Pearl Street and the 1400 block as a gateway. We have extraordinary play structures up and down the mall, and looking at the 1400 block as an opportunity to engage and activate that that location a little more. So there's a lot of exciting opportunities on the Pearl Street Mall for reimagining and reinvestment. Next slide, please. Just jumping back on that, not back on the slide, but part of that conversation about Pearl Street is really, and one of the themes of the vision plan is co-creation. How do we do this with the community? How do we not impose the vision, but really build the vision and the implementation of the vision from the community? Moving on to our second big exciting activation or proposal is enhanced human-centered streetscapes, activating the surface parking lots and alleys. We have a lot of spaces that are underutilized that could provide a lot of opportunities. This all ties together, promoting affordable and food retail options. This came up a lot in our input about affordability and how do we allow for more affordable, both commercial space and goods. And so there's an opportunity to explore some of the underutilized spaces towards that. And then sub-district identity. Pearl Street Mall is world renowned. And there's a lot of our downtown, and there's more opportunities to expand. We have an extraordinary West End, extraordinary East End, looking at 13th Street and moving east, south, north, west, and really promoting and creating placemaking and branding in sub-districts. Go ahead, next slide. And then, these are pretty pictures that support those ideas. Go ahead, next slide. Very excited about our third, as we again continue to move outward. The Creek Corridor is such an important part of this community and an important part of downtown. And how do we continue to invest and support and embrace the natural environment that is there, and really fold that into the identity and the programming and the activation. Go ahead, next slide. Again, continuing outward, connecting to nearby neighborhoods. We're very, very excited downtown about some of the more exciting things we've been talking about is University Hill and the opportunities with the Conference Center and the Hill Hotel, and what does that mean for downtown, and how does downtown support the investment on the Hill and connect with the Hill. So we're very excited about mobility exploration and really looking at how do we connect with the University Hill. Also Boulder Junction, also North Boulder. There's a lot of excitement happening throughout the city, and what is downtown's role in relationship to all of the excitement. And then also beyond just the commercial districts, which are very important, how do we make sure we stay connected with our neighborhoods from an access standpoint and a programming and identity standpoint? Go ahead, next slide. Safe and comfortable and interesting infrastructure, really looking at how do we tie all of this together. A lot of what we talked about is discovery, opportunities for enhanced public art program that's dynamic. Shade structures came up a lot. I think we love our trees, and trees sadly have a lifespan, and they sometimes take a long time before they provide shade. So what else can we do in addition to more trees and continuing the great work that forestry does with that? But so looking at the infrastructure on a lot of different levels. And then finally, one more, next slide, please. Really, how do we tell this story? How do we promote downtown as belonging to all people in Boulder and all Boulderites, no matter when they got here or who they are, or if they're here for the day, they're a Boulderite, and our tourists and our locals, and how do we really tell the story of belonging, and not only tell the story, but continue to actualize the story of belonging. A lot of conversations, obviously, when we talk about downtown, we do talk about some of the challenges around our approach to the unhoused challenges here. So how do we play a role in communication of that and kind of helping to understand and provide support around those conversations? And finally, the really last and first thing is continued enhanced engagement. This is a launching point. We have a vision plan. We worked really hard on it, and it's done, but it's just beginning. So all of this will require a lot more engagement with community members, community groups. We really worked hard to make sure every voice was heard. And of course, we have a lot more work to do. We need to do better, and we need to keep working to include everybody in the conversation of building our downtown. Next slide. There you go. That's some pictures of continued enhanced engagement. Go ahead, next slide there. So there we are back where we started. The vision, downtown Boulder is a vibrant mosaic of human-centered places and sub-districts that provide diverse experiences and opportunities for all through deliberate inclusion, innovation, and co-creation. I'm going to keep saying it, and then we're going to do all the work to manifest it. Carry on, more slides coming up. There's our big ideas again. Keep going. So I'm going to segue into now what? This is a 5-year vision plan. I think some of this work will take a lot longer than 5 years. Some of this we're working on right now. And so I'm going to just touch on what we're working on our work plan for this year. Go ahead, next slide. There's a lot on this slide, but on the bottom there is our strategic pillars for the year, really looking at public safety, economic vitality, inclusion, equity, and co-creation, and citywide connectivity. So I'm going to touch on some of the work that we are doing currently, a little bit of the work, and go ahead, next slide, in these areas. Public safety, we are very proud of, and we continue to iterate our ambassador program downtown. We feel really good about the value that they provide to the community in supporting a lot of the other public safety and really the feeling of welcoming that they provide in the downtown. Really working with our ambassador programs to continue to coordinate more with outreach services, looking at advocating, developing more strategic advocacy, communication and education. We talked on that. And public safety activation is such a big part of that. How do we activate our public spaces? Activated spaces generally are and feel safe. So that's a big part of what we do. Go ahead, next slide. Economic vitality is a big part of what we do and what we always do. We do I'll brag on us for a little bit. We do quite a bit of marketing and work very closely with Visit Boulder in telling the story of Boulder and us specifically downtown Boulder. So that's a big piece of our economic vitality is telling the story. The second story is still very soft relative to pre-pandemic days. So we're really exploring how do we re-engage people in coming back to the office downtown or just activating this great office space that we have. We do a lot of data collection. We're really looking at how do we learn more from the data we collect about who's downtown and why and when. And I may have mentioned before activations. We do a lot of events and activations that's not just for public safety, it's for economic vitality as well. And next slide. Our third strategy is an inclusion, equity, and co-creation. And again, this is really an important value for the organization. Really expanding our programmatic partnerships in all of our events and activations. How do we engage more people, bring more people to the conversation? We talked about the 1300 block reimagining. Did I mention activation? We're doing more activation. We have a great alley gallery program. If you haven't spent time in the alleys, we have some great artwork on the doors of the alleys, building on that. Looking more at a continued training on diversity, equity, inclusion, and bias training for internally, but also encouraging and working with Visit Boulder's done a great job of putting up a portal for service employees around some bias training, really working more to encourage that. And affordable commercial, this has come up a lot in the vision plan, is affordability. What can we do to support that, explore affordable commercial programs in the downtown? And our community advisory board, which is a really amazing group of leaders in the community who's focused on our efforts for inclusion and belonging, really supporting the goals of that group as well. One more strategy, I believe, here. Citywide connectivity, really looking at how we support, as I mentioned, the University Hill connections and other connections. I know the city's doing some great work on mobility and access strategies, and we want to make sure we're part of that conversation and really targeting neighborhood engagement and how do we keep the neighbors involved. I think I have one more thing to tell you about. Oh, activations. we're doing some downtown activations. I'm just going to touch on some of the things we're doing. If you come downtown, even if you spend a lot of time downtown, please do make sure to look up for the next little bit through Boulder Arts Week. The Student Banner Art Project is something that we do that's a collaboration with local schools and Boulder Arts Week. We have extraordinary artists, young artists from grade school through high school who put up, we do the Student Banner program down on Pearl Street. We're doing a number of activations. The bolded activations here are new this year. Next week, is that already next week? We're doing an experiment of an après-ski festival on the West End. So we're going to be having a party on the West End next on March 12th. We'll have some fire pits and furniture and booths from outdoor. I know it's a rarity to get outdoor apparel vendors showing up downtown, but we might have some there. And then, of course, the most adorable event on the planet in spring is Tulip Fairy and Elf Festival. And another new thing we're doing this year, a window painting project, again, with young people coming to paint spring-themed pictures on windows of businesses downtown. We're doing a series of outdoor cinema on the East End, the West End, and in the Civic area in June, July, and August. So stay tuned for that. And that's coupled with also returning of the Pearl Street Race Series. We have the Pearl Street Mile, and which we're bringing back this year in partnership with Team Production, Lee Troop and his team, the East End and West End Mile. I think they were 3Ks pre-pandemic, but we're making them all miles because we're exhausted, frankly. And then, of course, the very popular all-electric T-Bow train runs every weekday in the summer between Memorial Day and Labor Day. And our Pearl Street Arts Festival in July. And Bands on the Bricks, we have 8 fun-filled Wednesdays. And then just a tease for in next fall, we're producing a very fun co-created festival of activations. So some weekend in the fall will be our working title is TBD Boulder. So we're going to have activations throughout downtown, all kinds of activations from community groups. So stay tuned for that. So that's just a little bit of a tease of downtown activations. So that's our vision plan. That's our year. Is there another slide? I think there it is. Thank you so much. I would love to answer any questions or get any answers or just have a conversation, but I just want to end by thanking you again for all of the support that the city and city staff has provided through this project, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done together. I hope you all are as well, so happy to entertain questions.
Thanks so much for all that, Chip. It's exciting to see the vision plan come together, and can't wait to see what you do next. We got Tara?
Do you feel we have enough activations at this time?
I never do. I never think we have enough. I mean, the beauty of downtown Boulder and the Pearl Street Mall is we don't have to do much to activate downtown. We have some of the best buskers you're ever going to see. We have, all of the people who are downtown. It is activating. So I think our role as we build activations is really to foster people who aren't downtown to come downtown and co-create with folks. So never enough. But we don't have to do anything and it's activated, but we get to do things and make it even more interesting for more people. So.
Great, Bob.
So could you expand on that a little bit more? Because you talked about people who we don't see downtown. Can you give me some specific examples on some of these activations?
Sure.
Where you're drawing or hoping to draw people downtown who maybe are not traditionally seen in that area?
Thank you for that. I think that's a great question. We have done a lot of work and continue to do a lot of work with our community advisory board to really understand. We don't know who's not here because they're not here. So really trying to reach out to the community. We did have some great engagement with the city's community connectors on the vision plan as well. And I think similarly, the idea of really how do we engage people who are less engaged. And I do think it's, part of the vision, the statement in the vision plan, one of the really words is co-creation and really looking to expand our partnerships, bring folks in. We do a great Bands on the Bricks series, as you know, because you're at all of them. And in the last few years, we've really tried to partner with other organizations to have, for example, we've had healthcare worker nights where we've invited the healthcare workers from the community to come and, celebrate them and buy them a drink and really have a moment, and looking at how do we shift our programming and expand our programming for some of the nights to reach different audiences. So by doing that and doing partnerships, we do see people who come downtown who haven't as much, and really expanding on it. So I think for us, the co-creation piece is key in that, in bringing other audiences down. I think that the festival we're talking about in the fall really will epitomize that. If we're successful, we're going to really try to create a festival that is, our role is to create the space and to try to create a vehicle for other people to come in and express their ideas, express their vision in activations in downtown, and kind of have the conversation about what is downtown and how does it serve us. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit. It's both generally and specific, targeting people to come down and really continuing to say who's not here and where are they and how do we engage with them and invite them in. And invite them in not just to participate, but to create the downtown of the future with us.
Nicole?
Thanks for the presentation, Jim. Just along those lines, one of the things that I hear repeatedly from folks in our community is the need for permanent physical locations for particularly for marginalized groups in our community, right? So minority-owned businesses with storefronts, for example, right, that can serve as those physical connection points for groups in our community, cultural center, those kinds of things. So, especially as we're thinking about how to promote affordable food and retail, how can we support more minority-owned businesses with storefronts or cultural center, other kinds of spaces to be downtown that are really going to be those permanent things. So it's not just come in for a festival and maybe you'll come back another time, but really a permanent space that shows that we are really investing in getting folks from marginalized groups in our downtown to spend more time there.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's the question it's not a secret. Downtown Boulder's expensive, right? The commercial property is expensive. It's one of the challenges of this success. I think there are a lot of ways that we have really supported the city in the mobile vendor carts, for example, is something that's a very low barrier of entry. It's relatively cheap. It's affordable. We've worked really hard through our community advisory board, the community connectors, to do outreach when those spaces become available, when those permits become available, to do a lot of outreach. And I think we've been successful in attracting some minority businesses, and those we can do better. We can do more. And part of it is, what are the opportunities? I think part of the vision, as we talk about expanding downtown, we're talking about expanding the reach of who is part of downtown. And part of that is expanding the footprint of downtown. I think there's extraordinary opportunities to go looking at 13th Street and some activations where the farmers market are to provide some more opportunities there, more markets. I think it's one step at a time, though. And, I certainly don't have the answers, but I think we need to continue to invite people and provide opportunities. So providing affordable commercial space in prime space is going to be challenging because it's not affordable. And, additionally, in addition to just rent, there's a lot of cost to doing business. So where are the alternatives? How do we expand the footprint? How do we make downtown bigger and more accessible? We've seen some successes. I think we have great opportunities. Like, I'm excited for Avante has a new vendor who's I want to say El Salvadorian restaurant there, which is a great example of something that's a private enterprise with a master leaseholder who takes on the huge expense of that and is able to offer a smaller venue. So I think there's models to look at both in the private sector and the public sector, and most importantly in the private-public partnerships. So, but thank you for the question. It's a great question.
Yeah, Bob, and then Lauren.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow on Nicole's good comment, because I get the fact that we've got a lot of commercial spaces privately owned, and those landlords are going to, for the most part, maximize their the revenues and charge what the market will bear. But I also want to remind us that a lot of properties downtown are actually owned by the city. So this is probably directed as much at Chris and Nuria as it is Chip. You know, and a few things I can think of was the 2 kiosks are owned by the city. Most of that block off 13th Street between Arapahoe and Canyon is owned by the city, some of which are buildings that are being vacated soon. And we've got the whole wrap around the parking garage in the south side of Pearl, was that in the 1500 or 1600 block. And so there are a lot of properties that are owned by the city, and so we may have limited ability to nudge landlords to reduce rents where we don't own the properties. Where we do own the properties, I hope that we're looking at opportunities to welcome in communities that maybe can't afford $40 or $50 or $60 a square foot, but build what we're trying to do on equity and diversity and inclusion.
Thanks for that, and I'll say, sorry. I'll say that if you recall from last year's check-in, one of Brad's items was bringing like 13 different plans that had to do with the downtown together. This is part of that effort, and certainly we are constantly aware of the need for affordable commercial and bringing our values to that, which really revolve around equity. So we'll be thinking about what that looks like. And frankly, we'll be thinking about that not just for downtown, but other areas of the city. And I'll say that with the approval of the East Boulder Sub-Community Plan, so many opportunities may be there to really have a very vibrant center as well. So I think it's really on our radar. I don't know, Brad, if you had anything else to add or if you're good. You don't have to, but. We realize you sat all the way at the end, trying to be.
I was almost hiding. No. Good evening, Council. Brad Mueller, Director of Planning and Development Services. So, you know, these types of partnerships are wonderful and rare when an entity is able to take up an effort as comprehensive as this. It's kind of a planner's dream. Because we do know that as we embark on those various different planning elements that I outlined last week, that we think that there's an important facilitation role for our department, but really crosses a dozen or so different plans between 3 or 4 of our departments. This is the type of thing that really is plug and play. So we know that there's already some good engagement with what is an obvious major stakeholder, both as an entity and the various folks that Chip alluded to. So we're excited about this. We're plugged in and informed about it. And even though it's not a city vision, and there's many other stakeholders, of course, will want and need to engage, it is great. It's a great foundation, and like I said, a bit of a planner's dream as we imagine embarking on all that. And I'm happy to answer any other questions. Good. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Lauren?
Thank you. I really appreciated this vision plan and the framing of downtown as a vibrant mosaic and the focus on belonging. I think one of my biggest concerns is that our downtown might lose some of its unique character and become more of just a high-end open-air mall. We've seen it happen in other communities, and that's definitely, I think, a challenge that to make sure that it feels very of this place and of our community. You talked a lot about sort of safety and comfortability. And for me, I want to make sure that those are sort of mostly focused on physical and emotional safety. I think that because I really want to see us like be visually and culturally daring and experimental. And, you know, I think that we can do both. So I guess I wanted to ask you if you believe that that's important, and if you, beyond sort of the partnerships and the co-creation, which I think is a great way to do this, what else we can do to kind of encourage that more experimental nature for our downtown.
Yeah, I really love that framing. I think that's an important distinction about being safe and being innovative and being creative in a lot of ways. And I think it's something, there's a lot of tension we struggle with in that. And you know, a lot of the challenges we have in Boulder are the challenges of our success. I would say, again, my response is the vision of growing Boulder. And there are going to be things that, let's not mess with what's working. Let's build on it, both geographically, culturally, socially. So, you know, I really appreciate that distinction about safety and comfortability. And there's so much more we can do without jeopardizing any of what already exists in that safe. So I don't know if I'm answering that question, but I think that's it's a yes and conversation. And again, how do we look at not changing what's working, but building on it to grow, to do more and more differently with, you know, more ideas and more in, you know, there's places we can take risks. Jumping back to the affordable space question, if I can just finish, the city has put together a great program, as Bob mentioned, in some of the spaces. Anna's Art Gallery is one of the great examples of an affordable program. And it's not just rent. Affordability and accessibility go hand in hand. So I think we just need to continue to have the conversation as a community about how do we make downtown accessible from an economic standpoint, from a safety standpoint, from a social, cultural standpoint. And they're the conversations we're having, and they're the conversations we need to have, and we just need to continue to have those conversations. So reducing rent is a piece of it, but it's not all of it. So.
This one's for Brad, if you don't mind coming back up, Brad. We have, you know, Chip referred to the second story challenge. We've got a lot of empty office space. Some of that potentially could be converted to residential. I know that's not easy to do, and there's two barriers to that. One is financial, and there's nothing you can do about that. But then there's the regulatory component as well, and so that's, I guess, one part of the question is what can we do from a regulatory standpoint to facilitate the adaptive reuse of second story office space that may never come back. And the second part of it relates to the size of some of the first floor retail space. We've got some big swaths of retail space that's just huge, 8,000 feet, 10,000 feet, 12,000 feet, that have big old for rent signs on it. And the reason that is when you do 10,000 square feet times $60 a foot, it gets really stinking expensive. And this goes back to Nicole's point about how do we encourage small businesses to come in. And so I'd ask you, and maybe you got an answer now or if not, maybe reflect on it, how do we, from a regulatory standpoint again, facilitate the breakup of some of that space where we can take a 10,000 square foot space and make it into 5 twos, so that a small business can come in there. I understand there's physical constraints sometimes and access points, but if we're standing in the way of that from a regulatory standpoint, I'd really like to understand that and what we as a body can do to facilitate the breakup of space into smaller spaces, not only so it can be used, because some of it's sitting there empty, but more importantly, so it can be used by businesses that are small or startup, minority owned. So I'd love your thoughts either tonight or in the future.
Yeah, you know, I'm gaining an appreciation for the probably importance of flexibility in the situation that Boulder is facing. I think it is actually somewhat true across the country as we come out of COVID and find what very well could be an excess inventory of office space and this desire, a very healthy one from a land use planner standpoint, of mixed use as well. I think some of those are maybe straightforward tenant improvement, tenant finish kind of processing, and those are things, as I've described, we're working on. Others get into the building code and maybe get a little more complex on a building by building case. And your colleague and Councilmember Fulkerts can probably appreciate some of the challenges of transitioning certain office into residential, and maybe it's not even so much the code as you know, where the HVAC is located and all those kind of fun things that make those transitions difficult. But I think it is clear that we, both as an industry and as a department, need to be thinking about and imagining flex space, if you will, and transitional and transformational space in that regard. So that's part of the package for sure as we think about things.
So you might say breaking up is hard to do?
I would not say that.
I think we're at a crossroads, really. Not not just Boulder, but Boulder is at a crossroads where we have lost so much creativity, and we have so many issues, like, you know, the good old waiting a very long time for a permit, which affects people who are just trying to start their own business, and it really gives like giant. I'm not against giant corporations or anything like that, but it just takes away from the creativity that we can have downtown. So I'm very excited, Brad. I think this can be a crossroads for the positive, that maybe we can go from having the longest, possibly in Colorado, time that it takes to get a permit to the short. We could have it the shortest. I mean, can you imagine if we're known to be the most flexible, most creative, shortest time that it takes to get a permit? I mean, let's think big. That's what I'm saying.
I like to think big.
It's a big idea.
It's a big idea.
Good stuff. Anything else for Chip on the downtown vision plan? All right. Well, seeing nothing else, I'll just wrap up and say, Chip, thanks so much for coming and sharing all this exciting work with us tonight. And I think I speak for all of us who say that we're very open to having you come to us. And if there's any way that we can co-create an activation with you, we are there for it.
I have big plans for you. I appreciate that. Thank you again for the opportunity, and I'll see you downtown.
Right. See you there.
Best line of the night. What did you call that? The mall thing?
Okay, we got one thing left here, which is a discussion on boards and commission updates to council. 8B. And Nicole, I believe you brought this to us.
Nope, that was me and
it was you and Lauren?
me and Lauren.
Okay, so Nicole was asking for it to come forward sooner, but my apologies. So.
So during the retreat, we heard several people inquire about, or wish that there had been sort of an update from boards and commissions. And while the retreat has passed, we still have the opportunity to ask boards and commissions if there are questions, if we would like to get an update from all of them. And so Tara and I just wanted to bring that forward to see if that was something council is interested in, if there are particular questions that we would like to hear back from our boards and commissions on as we go into this upcoming year.
Like what do we want our boards and commissions to tell us? Do we want it to be a general vision, or do we want it to be more specific, what they would like to see, changes they would like to make, that type of thing?
Okay, Matt, Bob?
I appreciate the two of you bringing this up for a little bit more discussion. I would say my perspective on this is, I think kind of the ship sailed a little bit. I think the time would have been like December to get that feedback, to inform the retreat. We're about to appoint new members to boards and commissions, which is going to be in March, and then they got to get up and running. So I think that, you know, to have a report, we're going to be in April or May, and and then we're only just a few minutes before the election again. So I think it's a good conversation to have. I just think our timing is off on it, but I think we really want to flag this for the next retreat committee's conversation and make sure that we have a robust conversation with our boards and commissions leading into the next retreat. So,
Bob.
Thanks for that, Matt. That's exactly what I was going to say. I think now that it's March and we usually ask our boards and commissions for their feedback on work plan in December, we're only 9 months away from that. And by the way, our work plan is way too big already. So the last thing we want to be doing is asking our boards and commissions, hey, so what should we be working on? Because we have a pretty good idea of that. I mean, I'm sure they have brilliant ideas, but we have no space. So I agree with Matt that let's just put this on our calendar for next November, December to ask them what they'd like to see us work on in the 24-25 cycle. However, I do have a suggestion, which everyone may hate, and that's okay too. But I'm just full of crazy ideas. I'd like to suggest that rather than asking each board and commission what they think the priorities are or what we should be working on, is maybe surveying individual board and commission members, because some of our boards are happy boards and some of our boards are having some rough spells. And maybe that's something the boards and commissions committee can work on, is just putting together a very, very simple 5 or 8 question survey to send out to our board and commission members. What do you like about serving on a board and commission? What are your challenges? you know, what would you say to your successor? You know, things like that. Just kind of open-ended questions to get from them some input, because I think that's going to help you guys and all of us do our jobs. Because if we have some areas of concern or some issues or some uncomfortableness, I think it sometimes is easier for people to express themselves, obviously anonymously, but individually, as opposed to forcing a board of 5 or 7 people to get together and put together a letter, and then they have to kind of fight it out and so on and so forth. But just asking, we've got roughly 100 people, plus or minus a little bit, who are serving on our boards and commissions. Why not ask them how it is and what they would change if they had an opportunity? I'm not trying to create more work for you guys, but well, I guess I am. Yes, I am creating more work for you guys, which you turn around and then hand off to staff, I'm sure. But I'm just suggesting that it doesn't have to be in March. It could be in the summer. It could be after we have some new people appointed. But I'm just curious, because I don't think we have ever, to my knowledge, surveyed individual board members about their experience on the boards and what they like and what they don't like. So I'm just throwing that out there as something to do between now and next December, when we formally ask, as Matt suggested, what they want on the work plan. So I don't know, you guys can react to that if you want. Yeah.
You do like it?
I like it.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I think it would be good to check in with folks, and I'm sure that they would appreciate that. And I would just ask that as we are thinking about the survey and asking volunteers to spend more time filling something out, that we're just really clear about what we're going to do with that information. Well, I mean, keep it short, but also that we know what we're going to do. So it's not like people spend all this time filling something out and then new council comes in and maybe we do something, maybe we don't, right? I think that can almost be worse in terms of making people feel heard. So just being really clear about what it is we're going to be doing with that and how we're going to use it. And I think that will probably inform some of the questions that we're asking too. But I think it would be good to check in with folks more formally.
All right.
Yeah, I just wanted, and I know that this is something that the subcommittee can work with staff on, but just wanted to remind you that we will continue to move forward with our board and commission consultation, and that could also be sort of folded into that. So I leave that to the subcommittee.
Great. I'll call on myself and say I agree that we don't want to do a work plan check-in at this point. I had thought about maybe getting a status update from boards, just like what's top of mind right now. This survey could be a version of that, and I don't like the idea of hearing from individuals, you know, a pulse check on how serving on a board feels to them and what they feel is effective or not. I would just caution to keep it short and targeted, both for the board and commission members, to Nicole's point, but also our time is limited as well. So if we got 110-page submissions, that would be hard to keep up with. Yeah, Nicole.
I was just going to follow up on Nuria's point that I think this would be a great thing to fold in, because I think for me at least, the question is really about some of the work that Nuria is leading, and you know, are we using the boards effectively? Are they set up the correct way for what it is we need right now in terms of community feedback and guidance? So if we could fold it into that process, I think I would like that as well.
Okay. Rachel?
I'm wondering, do we do like exit interviews with board members rather than like doing a one time, how's everybody doing in 2023? Could we maybe just institute something that's ongoing to open up the door to feedback? Because I mean, we can't obligate the next council to do anything with this. So we can't really say, you're going to give this to us and we're going to act on it, because I don't know when we'll get it back. And, you know, any council's, you know, able to just undo whatever the previous one did, really. So just wondering if maybe we want to, boards and commissions could look at just doing something that's ongoing. You know, I would think with exiting members might be the easiest.
Okay.
We do not do formal interviews right now. It's just so.
Lauren?
Yeah, and I think a lot of this conversation ties into sort of a larger conversation that we're having on the boards and commissions committee about, you know, best practices and standardizing some things. And so I think that I think it was my intention to start to think about what sort of questions we should be asking boards and commissions as we move into sort of looking at all the rules and regulations around them, and also what kinds of things we should make regular priorities to help, you know, make sure that these positions are meaningful for people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wonder if we might just send this back to you all, to Tara and Lauren, to take this feedback. Do you feel like this is something you could work with in terms of what to take next steps? what next steps to take.
Yeah, this is great feedback. Thank you, you guys.
Okay, good enough, everybody? Great. Well, that's the end of our formal agenda, but if you all don't mind, I'm going to take a brief point of personal privilege to give a shout out to my father, who is in the audience tonight, Dr. Charles Brockett. So his passion for politics and his example is just an all-around amazing human being, have always been an inspiration to me. So wonderful to have you here tonight.
Do you have any open comment
No.
for us tonight?
Do you want to address the board? No. And then my very last thing is to thank Emily Richardson for a phenomenal job done tonight as acting city clerk. Appreciate and at least thanks for giving her the chance to do it and being here with us still tonight.
Thank you all for your help. Truly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts? All right, with that, I'll gavel us closed, 9:04 p.m.